Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 151. As always, I'm going to start us off with a tune.
To wait in heavy harness on flooded folk and while your new God's sullen people sat devil and that child take up the white man's burden in patience to abide, to veil the threats of terror and check the show of pride. By open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, you see.
No wonder we can't hear any sound. I think Duke's muted by the looks of it, so that's why we're not hearing anything.
Yeah, I can't hear anything either. So
Yeah, it says it's on mute for me. Like I've told him in private chat, like there's no sound coming out, so I don't know what the bloody hell he's doing off his end.
Well, should we step in and sing the tune? Where are we now? 100
Fuck
times they play to see God and the
He's
sound
on Iron Duke stream without being with tech issues.
Fulfill the mouth of famine.
Is there no sound playing?
No,
It says you
only
on
me
mute.
singing.
It's saying there's no sound playing.
No sound.
All right, hang on.
That's a good idea. Get a live Welsh choir to perform every weekend.
I know. I'll find some way of paying them AI for sure.
Yeah.
Hang on.
This is Duke's
Let me try this again. Tell me if this is working, guys, because the thing is, I can hear the sound. So if no one else can, it's no good.
Well, it said for us you were on mute, so
yeah. But when
that's
I
probably why
mute
we
my
couldn't hear
sound, it shouldn't mute this. It shouldn't mute. It's really getting. All right. All right. Is this working now, gents? All right. Hopefully it'll work this time.
Still buffering for me, but
so you might as well just download the video at this point and just play it off like a video player or something, as opposed to relying on the internet.
It's the damn 77th Brigade again.
He's probably right.
Moss out to get him. Like,
yeah. Some diversity high lesbian sitting at the desk there, fucking up our channels.
Yeah, they're probably building up a gulag especially for us as we speak.
Well, at least we'll be together in the gulag, so.
Yeah, like, you know, we'll just be like parodying Morrissey songs going like, there is a like that never goes out or something.
Yeah.
Why will that not stop? All right.
Still buffering for me.
How many times was Stalin in the gulag?
I'm just going to abandon us.
It was like,
how many times was Stalin what?
All right.
Stalin was in the gulag, what was it, like 6 or 7, 12 times? I know he escaped like several times.
I don't think like Visavis had gulags.
Oh,
it was just more
you mean
Siberia.
Or like wood logging camps, but I mean, yeah.
Yeah. They didn't really have gulags under the Tsar, boys. Can you
it's
hear
like
me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I mean, Solzhenitsyn once said about that the Tsarist secret police was only active in the 3 major cities. Outside of that, they weren't really that active, apparently. But I'm going to Solzhenitsyn.
What was it? The Okhrana was the Tsarist police, I believe.
Yeah, Okhrana. Because he said, like, outside of the army and the 3 major cities, which were Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Vladivostok, I believe it was, or could be or somewhere down south, rather. Those were the 3 major areas where Because I mean, to be fair, on the opposite ends of the Trans-Siberian Railway. That's probably what they were strategically thinking. Because Russia's such a big country, you can't imagine full on. You can't imagine everyone's going to get surveilled, especially in such a rural country at that time. But then again, I was looking at a documentary earlier where it said like the Russian economy before the First World War was going at 8% per annum. So, and it's like,
guys, before we move on to other subjects, first of all, apologies for the fuck up with the music. That was, of course, Chris Gard singing "The White Man's Burden." Do go and check out Chris Gard's excellent channel on YouTube. I would also, before we start, there was someone sent me a super chat during the week when I wasn't online, and it was someone called Twinkle who asked me if I'd read the Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence, i.e. Lawrence of Arabia, and what I thought of it. And I would just like to say, yes, I have read it. Yes, I think it's a very good book. I do think that Lawrence of Arabia may have exaggerated on occasion, shall we say. And that's all I have to say on that one, just so that people don't think I don't answer super chats on entropy, because I always do. Apologies for the mess up, guys, but it wouldn't be an ING Extreme if there wasn't some sort of boomer tech issue. I see people in the chat saying I should download it and play it from my computer. I will indeed try that next week. Right. Welcome to my guest, Mitch and AI. Mitch, you were talking about an AI. You were talking about how many times Stalin was arrested by the Tsarist secret police. Please carry on with that conversation. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah, because I know with Tsarist Russia, like what they preferred to do was exile you to like some random Siberian village that was fairly isolated, similar to what Mussolini did with his political opponents. Mm-hmm. So, like, whereas you compare what Stalin did with his Gulag archipelago, you get the image that the Tsarists weren't that harsh enough with the Bolsheviks.
Much smaller numbers of people. Also, the Tsarists sent far fewer people into Siberia than the communists ever did.
Yeah, because well, I'm perhaps picking one of the worst sources for this, like, because this was like years ago, back when I was still into like Marxism, like 6 Red Months in Russia by Louise Bryant. I'm thinking of a name, like the one who married that Warren Beatty film, Red. The guy who's based off that.
I remember that.
His wife, that's who authored the book, and like she said that the Cossacks in the Klana were harsh, as in they would for example, if they had like a female Bolshevik in their custody, they'd do stuff like very physically abusive stuff. The Cossacks were known to be like bloodthirsty in combat and whatnot. I can't imagine why, though, because you got in Russia at that time, they were very religious, so you can't imagine making abused women at will like that, even like a female Bolshevik. So I'm looking at that in hindsight from and I'm thinking to myself, I don't really think the female Bolsheviks were treated as harshly as that, because I remember like reading somewhere about like female Bolshevik prisoners under the Tsar. They were treated with more leniency compared to the male ones.
I've got some interesting stats here on the demographics of the Bolsheviks, but also the Mensheviks as well, and it's actually quite interesting. So, by 1905, 62% of members were industrial workers. So they would have lived within urbanized settings, compared to 22% Bolsheviks that were gentry. Of that gentry, 38% were uprooted peasants, compared to 19% for the Mensheviks. Now, in 1907, 78.3% of Bolsheviks were Russian and 10% were Jewish, compared to the 34% for the Mensheviks. So the 34% of Mensheviks were Jewish in 1907. So the total Bolshevik membership in 1905 was 8,400. And then a year later it went to 13,000, and then a year 1907 it was 46,000. So from 06 to 07 there was a huge increase. And there was a sizable increase with the Mensheviks, but not about like 10,000. I mean, you're looking at like for the Bolsheviks, it was what about like a 30,000 increase near enough in a year.
And of course, 1905 was the year that the Russians lost the Russo-Japanese War, and there very nearly was a revolution in Russia at that time as a result of that botched up.
Yeah, didn't Trotsky lead a revolt in St. Petersburg at 1905?
If he did, it wasn't very successful. But
I say that's why I won't say. I don't want to say like a revolution, like a small revolt or something.
But they did in 1905. Like the stuff came to a head because that was such a botched war from Russia's point of view. You know that they lost most of their Pacific fleet, and then they lost most of their Baltic fleet because they sent that round to the Far East as well, and the Japanese sank or captured most of it. And they didn't win the war, and actually they should have had a good chance of winning the war on land, even if they didn't win the war at sea.
Yeah. So, and what was it in 1906? The Mensheviks made an alliance, or was it with the General Jewish Labour Bund, which was like Poland, Lithuania, Russia, and they sort of and the Bolsheviks like became like a minority within that sort of that faction. They were like a minority. They were sort of with the Mensheviks and the Jewish Bund,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm going off my larger Russian a bit because the word Bolshevik comes from like comes from the majoritarian, because like Bolshe means big, whereas Menshe comes from. I mean, yeah, Menshe is like a variant of a word for small in Russian. So it's like the Mensheviks were just a smaller group, but like the thing was they were more moderate, so they had a lot more flexibility, a lot more capability to do alliances, whereas the Bolsheviks. Sure, yeah, there were more than the Mensheviks, but the Mensheviks had more sway. They seems more moderate, more reasonable compared to the Bolsheviks like Lenin. And I mean, I think Trotsky was originally Menshevik, and then he switched over to Bolshevism, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that for example. But like you had, yeah. So I remember Bowden. He was saying about how at one time the Bolsheviks, in like late 1890s, early 1900s, they were just like they were a small group just chatting at the back of London pubs rather than being Russian, because most of them got exiled.
For sure. Yep, they were.
Yeah,
absolutely.
A bit like us, just sort of debating and talking on like certain philosophies and subjects, and I mean, I remember that Bowen speech because he just said all it takes is like 10 guys together in a room.
Yeah, it's like 10% of the population cascade effect there onward.
If you look at London at the time of the Jack the Ripper murders in 1888, you'll find that there were these little mostly Jewish, it has to be said, Marxist clubs scattered around London. And it was just a few guys talking in the back room of a pub, rather like Bowden used to do himself, actually. But
yeah, I mean, you had I was going to say, you have a battle with Sydney Street, I believe that was. I mean, everyone put in it as Latvians, but these were like a more kosher form of Latvians.
They were a more kosher form of Latvians, yes, they were, and they were also what was called anarchists back in those days, which basically meant some description of Marxists.
Every time I see reference to the to that, it's always like, the people of the East End, the real English people came out to saw off the fascists,
which they did not. No, they did
not. They did not. Because they were cheering, of course, mostly on because they saw, the rot that was invited in at that time.
I mean, on the subject of small groups of people, I noticed that my little channel here and my little presence on Twitter, on X, managed to get myself on a little Antifa list, apparently.
I mean to ask, how does one check to see if they're on the the sort of
somebody told me that I was on there, but someone took a copy of the list, and the little soy boy Antifa dude who did it, who's an American, has actually been completely doxed himself now. So and good. And I don't agree with doxing people, but I'll make an exception for Antifa.
I tell you what, I'll be very upset if I'm not on that list. I mean, even Australian in the chat's on the list. You're on the list.
Yep.
I want to be on the.
Yeah, I'm not.
Yeah, it's kind of seen as if you can't make a little Antifa list like that. You know, you're not doing enough.
What's funny is I'm shadow banned to high heaven on Twitter, but then Antifa don't consider me in their bloody list, and I go I don't know if it's just like, I don't know, perhaps they just think, oh well, this guy's too obsessively focused on Anglo-Saxons or whatever. But he's not. But it's like, I don't know.
Raw Biscuits, there is I'm just saying to Raw Biscuits in the chat, there is that list is it's someone archived it on Twitter, so you can find it. You can someone did archive it, so you can find it and go through it if you want to. But there's thousands of people on it. It's a very long list.
Yeah, 22,000 or around that.
Is it 22? God, I didn't realize it was that many. But yeah, there's a hell of a lot of people.
Yeah, it's like some of the people on that list have like really small accounts, and I'm just thinking to myself, imagine like I'm a guy who's 43 years old. I can imagine like he's one of those basement dwellers who's just doesn't have a life and just
nothing else to do but go through 22,000 people's accounts.
Yeah, it's like the same with those journalists who doxed Toller. And all they did was they sifted for like hours and hours worth of his streams on YouTube just to catch some he said that might be so they can take it out of context or whatever. And it's just like, okay. And so the thing about Toller is he's just, I mean, he's the kind of guy who loves to like take a piss. Like he's just there to lighten people's spirit on every like Friday or Saturday night. Mm-hmm. So that's the whole point of him. I'm just imagining some journal for working for Hot Not Hate or whatever, just sifting through hours and hours of his content. Yeah.
Sorry,
I've got the list. I've got the list in front of me.
Oh, there you go. You found it. Good. I told you someone did archive it on Twitter, so you can find it if you're on there or not. But I don't think we should be putting it on YouTube, AI. So I'm not gonna link to it on here. But if people want to go and find it on Twitter, which is a more free speech platform than YouTube is, then feel free to go and look for it on Twitter, on X.
Well, the problem is the idiot, the Antifa special needs kid who did this didn't even do it in alphabetical order.
No, exactly. It's a very hard list to search. Actually, someone on the Discord, AI, someone on the Discord did come up with a way of searching it, but I can't remember what he said there. But if you look back on the Discord, there is someone did say how you can do it.
Apparently inbuilt search or something, but I don't know where we got that inbuilt search. Because I thought because it's a GitHub file, and GitHub files don't have an inbuilt search, like a PDF file would do, for example.
But this, like we're saying, guys, this is 22,000 people who are supposedly far right, according to this Antifa terrorist guy. You know,
I wonder how much time he devoted to just compiling this list. He's 43 years old. He should be having a family or something.
Don't be silly. At least, he's probably gay, mate.
Either that or just some, I don't know, just some very deviant personality or whatever. I don't know. But
yeah. Well, I'm not all that surprised I'm on there because I got put on another list which is much more well known. But someone who's also not very big these days, who I used to stream with, put me on a list of who's who in the alt-right, which I was most disappointed with, seeing as I did like 3 or 4 streams with the dude at one stage. But anyway, there you go. And I've never described myself as alt-right. I've described myself as DR. Absolutely, I am dissident right, but I was never alt-right, really.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know. Oh, where were we with that? I mean, I know the Bolsheviks. I mean, Russia's quite. I mean, I'm talking about modern day Russia. Like, I don't fully know what to make of like what the average Russian makes today of the Russian Revolution in hindsight, because a lot of them look at it and we just go, okay, before the First World War, Russia was doing quite well. Like it can and all that. So I can imagine like a lot of Russians see that as a lost era, much like how Argentines look at the 1930s.
Russia recovered very quickly from the Russo-Japanese War, as you were saying, Mitch, and by the time of the First World War broke out in 1914, Russia was doing quite well. They were industrializing very quickly because they were quite a long way behind Western Europe, but they were catching up, particularly with the help of French investment, which of course was somewhat self-interested because they were the main ally of the French. But Russia was doing pretty well up until 1914, and I think, but for World War One, I don't think there would have been a revolution, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's like, for example, I think it was like 1911 or 1912, where because the Tsar Nicholas, was it Nicholas II or Nicholas III? I think it was the second.
Second,
like,
I think.
Yeah, I keep thinking he's a third for some reason. But anyway, so apparently there was one time where a new soldier's uniform was being tested for the Russian army. And the Tsar at the time, Tsar Nicholas, he decided, okay, he's going to go marching for like 20 kilometers in this uniform. And at the end, he approved it. I always like refer to stories like that whenever I see because every time it's the anniversary of the October Revolution or the anniversary of the Romanovs getting killed off, you see all the fucking communists on Twitter just posting all these Wojak memes about the Romanovs. So that's like,
I like I say, well, if you don't know, Mitch, there's no way I know what the average Russian thinks about the revolution these days. I mean, I do think that the average Russians are still quite proud of their army in World War II, but I think that's got more to do with them defending Russia than it has to do with the fact that they were communists, and of course, the enormous losses that they took in World War II as well.
Yeah, it's like because you have like on one hand, like the Russians like the Soviet Union because it was powerful. Because that's the thing, like the Russians, like they see because it was very powerful. It provided them security from the Americans and all this. Like that's what they think of. But don't exactly think of like stuff like social welfare or healthcare or whatever when it comes to the Soviet Union. It's more of a sheer power and prestige that the Soviet Union had at its peak, especially with like Yuri Gagarin and all that. But then it's also
they were technologically pretty advanced at one stage in the 60s as well. Yeah, very true. Very true.
Yeah, but then you also have, of course, a dark side of the Soviet Union where, for example, you have the gulags under Stalin. Then you had Khrushchev, who, in his infinite wisdom, you can blame Khrushchev to some extent for, as well as Lenin and Stalin, for the cause of the current war in Ukraine because they shifted Russian ethnic areas over to Ukraine and Ukrainian USSR control.
100%.
So when you get Russians looking at the Soviet Union, they look at the borders and they just go, yeah, we should have been. They look at the Soviet Union. It's a very pick and mix. But then it's also, I lost my train of thought, man.
AI, you got anything to add to that, mate?
No, I mean, I was looking for my name in the right wing Twitter, the Antifa journalist. But
okay, don't mind.
But yeah,
it will take you a while. 22,000 people, man.
Yeah, I'm not going to search it now. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. This, but I think I don't know really what to add. Because I sort of talk about the Bolsheviks as I mean, all I can say is that when you look at them, no matter what you think of them, there was some complete devotion to the cause, and what again, one of I think the speech that we referred to as what was Bowden was talking about was on vanguardism.
It was.
If people are interested, I think the one that me and Mitch was referring to as well, that was in that lengthy video which you can find on YouTube.
Where some people get their ideas for networks of tens and this kind of stuff. Yes.
Yeah, and that's what the Bolsheviks did. That's what the French revolutionaries did. All the various political clubs in France, and of course the mid-century German. This is what all successful political do, whether they're friend or enemy. And I think, when you look at Melee or Millie or whatever he's called in Argentina, it's like he's just by himself. He's got no political party. He's got no people behind him apart from the people, the public. But of course, as we know,
like Trump.
It means
a bit like Trump in some respects.
Well, he's got less than Trump. I mean, at least Trump had a few guys in. Okay, they weren't in any position of power, but at least he had like.
Trump sacked most of his good blokes,
yeah, yeah. But yeah, same with Trump. There's no.
But yeah, I mean, Oh, there you go. You are on there, mate. AI. Arlo is telling you you're 6,754.
6,000. What was it?
6,754. Yeah, so you are on that list.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's like the only thing I'm doing right now is I'm just harking because I was harking to that Russian Revolution documentary. It's like a documentary series, like made in Russia, but there's English subtitles to it. So I might share that later in the Discord. But anyway, it's like, for example, it's like because you get the whole the communists, they portray the pre-revolution Russia as full on vulture capitalism. Not the workers had no rights whatsoever. Meanwhile, it was something like I don't know when Henry Ford came up with an 8-hour workday, but around that time in the 1910, for example, the average Russian worked like 10.5 hours at the maximum per day. Like they were forbidden from working any more than that per day because there was a law. I'm pretty sure and there's also you through the work of Pyotr Stolypin and Sergei Witte. Yeah, it was just like Russia was. I'd say it was warring at 8% economic growth per annum. So it's like someone once said because I think Pyotr Stolypin once also said, "Give us 20 good years of peace, and the Russia by then will be completely transformed to what it is from now." So,
and this was pre the revolution you're talking about, is it?
Yeah, before the First World War.
Oh, okay, right.
Russia was in peace.
Yeah, no, I think that's very largely true. But I mean, you could also say that about much of Europe. I mean, who knows what would have happened in Europe, including Britain, without World War One? Who knows what would have happened? The whole continent would have been entirely different without World War One.
Yeah, so in the case of Britain, I mean, if we didn't have the First World War, first of all, we wouldn't have lost 1 million good men, but also we wouldn't have lost all our aristocracy in the war, and we probably would have been our economy wouldn't have been so burdened by the cost of a war. So
no, absolutely,
we'd still be able.
Britain wouldn't have been in debt. Instead, Britain would have been a creditor nation, which we were hugely before World War One. And we wouldn't have lost not just our aristocracy, but I mean, all the best men of all classes in Britain got killed in the First World War. I mean, obviously not all, but a large proportion of the best men of all classes, whether it was the aristocracy, the middle class, or the working class, the best guys were the guys who mostly got killed because they were the first guys to volunteer, and they were the guys to go and do the bravest and most stuff that was most likely to get you killed.
Yeah, it's like whereas you consider the aristocracy today, where they're all married into the families of all the midwits that make up. Like, for example, Dan Snow, who's like chief midwit as far as history is concerned, is well married into the aristocracy, and you've got other figures akin to that who, to a point where the aristocracy, I think, are just fully captured what's left of them. Because the inheritance tax, I imagine, also smashed them hard under Blair.
Hugely, yeah, it did, mate, and just increasingly all through not just the 20s and 30s, but also post World War II as well, of course. But yeah, absolutely, totally agree with that. But World War One totally changed the whole trajectory of Europe and the world, and for the worse, without any doubt whatsoever. It didn't do any nation any good, even the countries that won. I always say that the original sin of Britain and the Empire was joining World War One in 1914 and then raising a mass army in contradiction to all British military history. We've never done that before. We never should have done it then.
Yeah, it's like you have, for example, France, for example, their birth rate was already stagnating before the First World War because Napoleon got so many men killed.
Yep,
then you imagine, like, the French birth rate went down to so much as low as 1.5 back in the 1920s. And this is a time when modern medicine wasn't yet fully advanced to make the 2.1. So the TFR required was like something like 3.5 or something like that.
Yep.
Before the 2.1 we now have.
Totally true. Yeah, totally true.
Yeah.
People in the chat are saying Dan Snow is a good bloke. Dan Snow, Patriotic Archive, is a terrible shit lib. I have to say, I'm very fond of Patriotic Archive. He's in my Discord. He's got a great channel of patriotic music, but Dan Snow is not a good dude.
I don't know if there's been confusion because you got Dan Jones who does like Plantagenet history, who isn't half bad. Dan Jones.
But I think he means Dan Snow, who is the son of the elder Snow bloke who did stuff on TV. I'm presuming that's who he means. And Dan Snow is a terrible shitlib. He really is. Yeah,
no, because I've seen people mix up Dan Jones and Dan Snow before because they're both sort of similar age and.
I don't know the other bloke AI. He might be excellent, but Dan Snow is not.
All I know, Dan Jones, he does like Plantagenet era. You know how Starkey, like David Starkey, is Tudors. With him, it's Plantagenets. And
I'll look him up because I find that quite an interesting era. So.
To be fair, the book that I've got, there is no like shit libbery. It's just straight up historical facts, which I appreciate. He's pretty good. He does Templar history as well.
Okay, cool.
He's quite an interesting guy. He also did a documentary series on trebuchets and castles in Wales.
Quite interesting. That would be interesting, yeah for sure. Yeah. Just to segue into a bit more of a contemporary subject that Mitch and I were talking about before we went live. One of the very good things that Putin in Russia has done recently is he's basically banned LGBTQ stuff in Russia.
Yes, it's designated as extremism because it's like you take a Pussy Riot who were like a very feminist band, but they're very Western feminist. So you can imagine the average Russian babushka, for example, who go to church. You can imagine just what their opinion of Pussy Riot is after that stunt they did in. I think it was St. Basil's Cathedral, but I'm not fully sure.
These were the chicks who used to pull their tops off and all this kind of stuff, weren't they?
I think that's feminine, but feminine and pussy were basically overlap, so they're basically the same bloody thing.
I remember back in in Sochi, it wasn't the Winter Olympics at Sochi. There was some Cossack with a whip who whipped the one of their members
Channel 4, I think it was, or BBC, I can't remember. But I got in my bloody liked videos list as well. I'll get it.
Because back then, I would say back then I was like a really bad like normie, like Tory type. But even back then when I watched it, I was like, I don't know, I kind of like what Russia's doing here. Even though I thought to myself I shouldn't be thinking like this, but
but I mean, given the way that Ukraine is plugging the Western full-on LGBTQ line, I just think that Putin is being very sensible because most of the more traditionalist and sane people in the West, and I still think that's probably a majority, just about, will see that, what Ukraine is plugging and what the West is plugging is actually evil, especially to children.
Well,
whereas what Putin is doing is trying to protect them.
Well, I view like NGO charity groups and organizations that promote this are usually by it's not so much techno-globalist, but it's more like the neoliberal types, right? And I view it as an attempt to spread, the ideological people who are committed to liberal democracy. It's entangled within that mission. We saw it attempted in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Like the headlines here. What about the LGBT Afghans? And it's like, well, I mean, the LGBT
it's just
Afghans.
bullshit when you try and put it on third world people anyway. But yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's bullshit. Even in the West, it's a way of, and we'll be honest, it's a way of America expressing its power overseas. It's just the non-military way of expressing its power, and that's reality. And of course, someone like Putin or whoever, if they want to keep American power out, you have to keep the LGBT stuff out, because all of that. I mean, what is the founding mythos of LGBT month? It's the Stonewall riots. It's that Harvey Milk guy in California. It is the be end all and all. It starts within American civilization. I mean, am I wrong?
I don't know if I'd say it was much to do with traditional American civilization, but today, yeah, sure, in the modern world, yeah, for sure it is. And they push it. The Brits push it. You watch Forces TV on YouTube, which is British Forces TV on YouTube. It's a Ministry of Defence channel. It's paid for by British taxpayers, and it spends most of its time pushing LGBTQ stuff and feminist stuff. Most of its time. And also, obviously, diversity, i.e. anything that's anti-white. That's what they spend most of their time doing.
I mean, usually these organisations, I think Victor mentioned it in chat, that they'll do like silly little things like women independent coffee shops in Iraq, or women only businesses, like women only carpet selling shops in Kandahar, or something mad like that. That they will do like these sort of performative, westernized, these westernized projects. In some cases they're successful. In other cases, I think Afghanistan was the most absurd one, because of course it wasn't successful in any sense. But it is what it does is it kind of creates more animosity, which is strange, because one thing I can't really get over with the American Empire is, unlike other previous empires, they relish in just, and I get that there have been rival empires in the past with the conquered nations, like, oh, we conquered you, now we're going to demean you and punish you and humiliate your gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
Romans have done it. It's normal. But the
Romans used to generally adopt other people's gods.
It depended. I mean, like if you look at
the Romans were very, very liberal, not liberal, but they were very generous in allowing other people's gods. They really were.
They were, but like the Carthaginian gods, for examul, they
didn't like them because the Carthaginians used to sacrifice little kids.
Well,
the Romans were against that. The Romans were against that idea, and in the same way, they were against the Druids in England and in parts of Europe, because they used to sacrifice people as well. The Romans didn't like human sacrifices, and they very seldom did them. I'm not going to argue that they were wrong about that, to be honest with you.
Well, regardless, what in those instances, the Romans wouldn't toy with the Carthaginians or the Celtic peoples. When they came in, they just wiped it out. Civilization gone, right? It's just gone.
Well, again, with the Celtic people, what actually they did was the Romans, they got rid of the Druids because they didn't like them, because they didn't like the human sacrifice.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The Druids were gone. Yeah, the Druid power was gone.
But the Celts, what they did was, as they did everywhere, was they adopted the aristocrats of that civilization and Romanized them. That's what they did.
Yeah, but the Druids itself, the political power of the Druids, were gone. They were gone. I mean, they were in Ireland and places like that, but apart from that, they were gone.
But they weren't. They were still there, but they were Romanized. Like there were many
Weren't a lot of
Celtic.
druids? Weren't a lot of druids though killed in Anglesey? Loads of
druids were killed. They didn't like the druids, but the druids were a priestly class. But the aristocracy of the Celts were mostly Romanized rather than killed.
Yeah, but I led to believe the leadership of the druids, the top druid figures were killed though. That was
they were, but they were a religious leadership. They weren't the warlords. The warlords.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The
warlords were mostly Romanized, but the druids, who were the religious leaders, yes, they did kill them off, for the same reason that they didn't like the Carthaginian gods, because they did human sacrifices. And as Victor Claros points out in the chat, the Romans did a couple of human sacrifices once that we know of very early in their history. And apart from that, they never ever did it again.
But going back to the American Empire point, my point on that was that unlike previous empires, which do the conventional of, okay, we're going to assert our values and our sort of religious way of life as the conquering force, whatever. Our values and our
basically, but basically, what you could say is their lack of values and their lack of religious life.
But that's the point. But the thing there is, it's like it's literally like some fat lesbian going, no, we're gonna strip the tradition away and we're gonna make it like gay and McDonald's, and it's just so bizarre because in I genuinely believe that this tactics has made America way more enemies. Like, let's just say that they had the evangelical, like literally their whole modus operandi was evangelical moral system of government. Like none of this global Mick world crap to go along with it. Mm-hmm. If they just did that, okay, it would piss off some Muslims. But at the end of the day, I don't think it would have had that deep hatred that comes from Asia, from Africa, from the Far East. Because that hatred is like, because they know that America. The reason why they view America as a great Satan is because it in many way they describe it is a disgusting, degenerate, immoral country.
I think, and that's not to do because of them. I think you've got to point out that when you're talking about America, you're talking about the American government and the American deep state and the CIA and all the rest of it. You're not necessarily talking about the majority of the American people, who mostly are probably fine.
Well, isn't that what we mean, though? Because
Well, when we're talking about America, I mean, in the same way, when you're talking about Britain these days, you're talking about Rishi Sunak and the awful so-called Conservative Party, which is actually not conservative at all.
Well, yes, I talk about
and obviously the civil service and the deep state in Britain as well.
It's like I talk about France in terms of its revolution. No, it's only the elites, but I don't know. Perhaps I don't know, but I don't see why we have to suffix everything we're saying. Like when we say America, of course we're going on about the elites. We're not going on about every single American.
Absolutely right. Absolutely, but I just think, Mitch, I think it's worth saying, and I think it's worth saying also because sometimes I'll talk about Britain when I really mean the British government. There's a load of really good people in Britain. That's not Rishi Sunak.
I mean, the whole point of the stream was to prove that there are indeed Brits who are against the consensus in like London and so on.
100%.
So I don't see what. 100%. So I don't see why we have to.
Again, we were talking about this, Mitch, before we went live. I was born in London. And it is a shithole, and it's no longer an English or British city. It isn't. It's a foreign occupied city now.
But my issue is why do we have to keep suffixing everything we're saying? Oh, we don't mean everyone. No, it's like, of course it doesn't mean everyone. I mean, isn't the whole point of this? For one, the fact that
the elites and the government, the government and deep state organisation, like the civil service and all these idiots.
Yeah,
basically.
everyone knows actually, because everyone who listens to this must have a triple-digit IQ for being here. Like no one is going to be retarded.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're probably fair about that. Yes, you probably are right about that.
Because it's like because that's the thing about it's like, I don't know, it's like to come across these circles, you have to go out your way somewhat. Which, if you're a retard, you won't be able to unless you've got family in this or whatever. Then, you know,
I do just think that Victor Claros makes a good point here. He says, I think it's worth making the distinction because conflating the ruling class with the nation lends legitimacy to the ruling class. And, Biden doesn't represent most Americans any more than Sunak represents most Britons. In fact, probably Sunak's even less because Sunak's not even Anglo-Celtic, whereas Biden is at least some description of an American. But, whatever.
Well, it's like the Americans who are not represented. I mean, it's like, for example, I know you say the Anglo-Saxons who resisted William the Conqueror. William the Conqueror, he only ruled as like a minority faction, or even Normans, as well as their Breton mercenaries and whatnot. But the thing is, he was able to impose his will because he had the means, while the Anglo-Saxons, most of their leadership was slain or migrated over to the Eastern Roman Empire, where they then conquered Crimea for the sake of building New England. So,
and also eventually formed most of the Hungarian Guard, which were the people who actually defended the Byzantine Emperor. So
it's like
I do think that probably when you've had like significant change in history between monarchs or governance, let's say, I doubt that people at that time really agreed with it. Significant change at that time.
But I don't know about you, AI, but like I'm a natural small C conservative. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So if I'd have been around at the time of Harold, I would have definitely fought against William the Conqueror. And if I'd have been around at the time of Charles I, I would definitely have supported the king against Cromwell. And not because I was a big Charles I fan, just because he was the king, But I'm a small C conservative in that sense, and I always have been, and I think most people are actually, given the chance.
I get called controversial when I say if I was born around the time of the Civil War, I probably would have fought for Cromwell, to be honest, just because the king was so bad, to be honest. And Charles II was no good.
Cromwell wasn't better, mate. Cromwell was not better.
I mean, Cromwell did. He was part of his popularity. Well, I say his early popularity. I would say within, especially in the southeast and everything, was that he was like a Caesar-like figure in some way.
Yeah, I'd look like I said. I'm sure Mitch and I would have been on the same side if we'd have been around in 1066. We'd have been fighting against William the Bastard. But in the 1600s, I would have been a royalist, not because I was a fan of the king, but because I wouldn't really have wanted to give more power to Parliament.
I mean, I guess when it comes to 1066 argument, I mean, if we were all, we were all Anglo-Saxons, and I mean, of course we would. But if we were like Normans, then we would be, we would be on the sides of William the Conqueror. But yeah.
But my family's Anglo-Saxon. I got an Anglo-Saxon Christian name, for God's sake. All the firstborn sons of my family have an Anglo-Saxon Christian name. I would definitely have been on Harold's side, 100%. But
I'm like, when it comes to Roman emperors, I'm Caligula's biggest cheerleader.
I know. Whereas I'm more conventional, and I like Marcus Aurelius, and I'm also not. I quite like Claudius, but Marcus Aurelius was a good guy.
I tell you what, the reason why I think I'm like a big revisionist, and I might do like a stream, just do like a whole revisionist take on Caligula, is he oversaw a great transition from republican rule to imperial rule. And I know you've had like Augustus and everything, but you still had the last vestiges of the corrupt senators, politicians, and Caligula was like his passing shot was to basically humiliate them and make them look like total scumbags for the people at every turn. And I don't know, I kind of respect that. Like even like the making his horse a senator, just to showing them the absolute contempt.
Yeah, we don't even know if he really did that, though. That could be one of these exaggerations passed down by later people. Victor Claros says he likes Vespasian. Yeah, Vespasian was a good dude. I like Vespasian.
What do you make of Aurelian?
He was all right too. I mean, he put the empire back together when it had almost died. Alice Liddell, I like Julian the Apostate. Yes, I like him. He was the last of the pagan Roman emperors. I think, and he was also a pretty good commander as well, until he sadly got killed. But yeah, he was pretty good. Another good Roman emperor.
I mean, this doesn't count, but Magnus Maximus. I mean, I think that in a way, had it not been for him, the Anglo-Saxon invasion would have been possible because all the good legions under his control in Britannia got killed off in the battle in the modern-day Croatia, I think it was. Can't remember the name of the battle now, but he battled against Eastern Romans, I believe, and he got smashed and executed. So, and that's the problem was, I think like there's actually a Welsh national song called Imar Hyd, which means we're still here, and that it mentions Magnus Maximus as like being a figure the Welsh look up to because he tried to become Roman emperor. But the thing was that he's not even Welsh at all because his first name Magnus means that he was half Germanic himself. He wasn't Celtic, so I don't know why the Welsh claim him. To be honest,
well, because the Welsh were probably the last, apart from some people in Cornwall and up in southern Scotland. They were the last of the Celts who became Romanized.
Yeah, it's like
if you read people like the Venerable Bede, etc., and they're talking about the awful state of England during the Dark Ages, or Britain during the Dark Ages, they actually talk about the fact that the last bits of Roman civilization in Britain were in Wales and Cornwall and a few bits of southern Scotland.
Yeah, because the Anglo-Saxons didn't really maintain it, but I mean, I think Watling Street, for example, was still usable in 1066, for example. Yeah, I don't know about the Roman baths. However. And
they lasted. Some of them lasted like about 100 years after the Romans had officially withdrawn. But then you had loads of Romanized Brits moving to Brittany, which is where Brittany in France gets its name from. So you've got that. Australian in the chat saying his English DNA is from Cornwall. And again, Cornwall was another fairly Celtic bit of England. In fact, Cornish was a separate language, which only really died out in the 19th century. I think people are trying to revive it now, but you know. And Cornwall's also one of the most beautiful parts of England, also, by the way.
But with a bit of a Cornish though, that I just cringe when I think of them because they just try so hard to be Celtic. But then the thing is, genetically, there's no difference between a Cornishman and a Devonian. Genetically, because they've both got the same level of Anglo-Saxon ancestry. So the idea of is it like the Cornish that tried to say, oh well, we're not English at all, and I go, well, you've mixed with us. They've been.
Yeah, I don't think. I think only a few extremist Cornish people say that, mate. I mean, I spent quite a lot of time in Cornwall, and I didn't ever have any.
I mean, I would say as someone who knows the area quite well, there's more Anglo-Saxon, I guess you would say, archaeological history in Devon than in Cornwall.
Yes, there is.
Greatly. Like there's one place on Dartmoor where there was a Norman fort. It's in the middle of this village, which is in the woods, and we know from archaeological bits that this village was it's not so far from Exeter and Plymouth. And it was, there was quite a sizable Anglo-Saxon population in that village and the surrounding villages, and the reason was because there was a consistency of banditry and small revolts.
I mean, the Anglo-Saxons were still fighting against the Cornish in the so-called Dark Ages. But by the time of Saxon kings, Anglo-Saxon kings like Alfred the Great, who were learned in Latin and so on, they by then realized, like Victor Claros is saying, there's a Saxon poem that compares Roman ruins to the work of giants, and there is. I think I've seen it somewhere. But by the time of people like Alfred the Great, those guys, because they were learned in Latin and history and the rest of it, and I mean Alfred the Great had been to Rome. Those guys realized that this was an earlier civilization that had been in England, you know.
Well, yeah, it's like because you have Cornwall. I think it was like King Egbert, grandfather of Alfred, who subjugated the Cornish under Wessex. Because before then, it was still its own separate kingdom, independent.
Yep. Yeah, that's right.
So that's why Cornwall doesn't have an Anglo-Saxon settlement history like my county does, for example, or East Anglia or Northumbria or wherever. So that's why
But I think what we have to make clear, because the lefties come out with this bullshit all the time, is that whether you're talking about Celts, whether you're talking about Anglo-Saxons, and even if you're talking about Normans or Danes, all of these people are Northwest European peoples who are very, very closely related in DNA terms. They're very closely related, all of them.
I'll be playing devil's advocate here.
They're nothing like the sort of mass immigration that Britain these days gets from people from sub-Saharan Africa and the Far East and the subcontinent and the rest of it, who have nothing whatever to do with British DNA.
Right, I'll be playing devil's advocate a bit here, but okay, so you have the Anglo-Saxons and the Welsh, who at the time of the Anglo-Saxons came around, they called this Welsh the Welsh because it literally means foreigner in Old Germanic. And then you get the Welsh who still call the English to this day Saxons, or if you're Gaelic, you say Sassenach.
Yep.
So there's that. But you can imagine, because you got it. This is a time when no black man or no white man ever, no person living in Britain or Northern Germany knew that black people even existed. Probably never saw a black man in my life.
No.
So you can imagine. So you can imagine what the difference is between an Anglo-Saxon and a Welshman would be much more emphasized in sources like Gildas than, let's say, hey, we would just in the same way that we describe differences between a Pakistani and an Englishman.
Yeah, so, and I mean also even when you're talking about the Normans, and the Normans, they were originally Northmen. The Normans and the Danes were very closely related, and the Normans and the Danes were very closely related to the Anglo-Saxons, who in turn were very closely related to the Celts, all Northwest European peoples. Same with the French Huguenots, who eventually came over to Britain in relatively tiny numbers compared to modern immigration. But even when the French Huguenots came over, the French Huguenots, again, were Northwest Europeans.
I do remember Survive the Jive, Tom Roswell. He did a breakdown demographic of England. And one thing that's quite interesting is he sort of does a critique of other, Oxford and other demographic breakdown of the native Brits. And 25% of your Germanic origin, and then it's 25% of French. And the French one's quite interesting because it's actually rather misleading. What it is that it takes the Franks, because of course the Franks, the Saxons, came from that sort of, and the Frisians came from all that certain region in northwest Germany, right? And part of Denmark. It's that sort of group region. And I think a lot of that French DNA that they put into the English one is pretty much like Germanic, Anglo-Saxon.
It's northern French people who are actually largely Germanic anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say though, yeah, I mean that's true because the Burgundians are a different Germanic people who settled there. I mean, I would say Aquitaine, Gascony, Poitiers, and southern France. They're more sort of Romanized. I mean, but even then you had the Goths, and so there was that mixture in there as well.
Yep.
But I do think a lot of that is mixed up. And also one interesting thing, because Devon and Cornwall, I remember because of course you got the Tamar, which is what separates Devon and Cornwall, right? And you have villages on either side, towns and villages on the other side. There was, I'm looking for the article, but I do remember that there was a somebody who wanted to test the genetic makeup of those on Cornwall and those on Devon to see if there's the similarity difference. And the funny thing is, even though I mean they're very closely aligned, because it's all said what Mitch was saying, that they're actually the Cornish are more genetically similar to the Germanic people than to say like the Irish, Welsh, everything else.
Which you would expect after years of interbreeding, but yeah, absolutely.
But there is one interesting thing: that there is a slight difference within the Devon stock, and basically it goes back to I said that Devon are more Anglo-Saxon than that, and so there is actually a slight difference. It's slight, but you can actually tell on they actually show like a map, and it's really funny because it shows the border of Cornwall and Devon basically.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Just goes to show,
I mean, I believe there is there's a little more Danish DNA in Britain, in English people in the north of Britain and in the south of Scotland than there is in the southeast, which would also make sense because it was in the southeast was where Alfred the Great managed to stop the Danes. So
well, it's like you have. It's reckoned, Matt. Like the thing about the Danish is that they're so genetically similar to the Anglo-Saxons that you can't tell the difference. So when people say Scandinavian, they just mean Norwegian or Swedish because there's enough genetic markers to distinguish them. Now, the average Englishman is like 10% Scandinavian, so that's like 10% Norwegian and Swedish. Because you got to think, sure, yeah, we called all Vikings Danish because Denmark was the only country we knew of in that area. Sweden and Norway weren't properly unified at the time.
But I think, am I right, Mitch? I think that the Orkney and Shetland Islands were Norwegian, basically, colonies at one stage.
Yeah, the Orkney Islands were only given over to Scotland to the wedding dowry in the 15th century. So they were Norwegian for a long time.
And the Shetlands, of course, are even further north than them. Victor Claros in the chat is correct that Dublin was founded by the Vikings, and it was founded as a slave trading port. Basically, that's how that was how Dublin was founded. But
Isle of Man was a Viking.
Yes, absolutely. You're right, AI. Thank you. You're correct. That's also got, and it's still got quite high, Scandinavian DNA in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about southern France as well is genetically they're closest to the Hallstatt Celts. So, people think of the southern French as being. I mean, I do think of times of southern French as being very swarthy, but then genetically they're closer to the Austrians than they are to the Central Italians. So, even southern Italy, southeastern Italy, rather than Savoy and western Switzerland, that sort of area, they're still genetically closer to the Hallstatt Celts who came from Austria. Because there used to be a popular perception that the Greek and Romanized areas of southern Gaul were softly Romanized, that there's a lot of Roman stock, when actually now it's just more cultural rather than genetic.
Yeah, that was true in most of the Roman Empire. Most of the Roman Empire was the same.
I would say, though, in reading Charles Oman's book on the Dark Ages, during the Roman Gothic wars of Justinian and Belisarius, during the long sort of recapture of Italy from the Ostrogoths,
who were basically Germans.
Yeah, they were Germans and Aryans, and the Ostrogoths, because their most of the Germanic settlers were in Ravenna, so like this is like Pavia, so and particularly Pavia in particular in northern Italy, but central Italy and southern Italy was still overwhelmingly the population was still like the Latin, the Latin and Greek speaking population.
Have you visited Italy?
No.
Well, if you go to Italy and you go to northern Italy, especially like Milan and some of those places, there's loads of very cute Italian blonde girls. They're very common, and I think there's a reason for that.
Yeah, I was going to get on to that point.
Yeah.
What I was going to say was that during the Gothic Wars, the Latin population, like as you mentioned, like places, modern day Turin, Milan, Pavia, they were just decimated, and it was left basically near enough barren, according to Charles Oman. There was, and also this was the time you had the pestilence, plague, and war, and of course as I think Mitch was just going to say, of course, the next stage was the Lombards, who then swept in, and they settled the northern Italy, and of course that's what led to the creation of Venice, because the Latin population there held out.
I think you've also got to say that, of course, much later in history, lots of northern Italy was Austrian, and Austria again is a Germanic nation. So that's another reason you have so many blondes in northern Italy.
Yeah, I mean Napoleon. Actually, no. Sorry. I think the last time, I think it was in World War One. The Austrians were technically finally kicked out of Italy, in theory.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean the Napoleon III fought wars to try and kick the the Austrians out of Italy, and to some degree it succeeded at battles like Solferino and what have you, at great cost. Yeah, the Austrians still had Italian possessions.
I know there'll be some
certainly up until 1870 or 1872 or something. There were still Austrian possessions in Italy.
I mean, technically, I know in Austria, is it Tyrol? That is, there's a lot of
Trento, I believe it's called.
There's a lot of like ethnic Italians or people who identify as Italian living there. But I mean, you have to draw a line at some point, I guess. So,
but there's also bits of Italy today that were originally Austrian, and there's still some Austrian resentment about that because they were given to Italy after World War One, and Italy didn't really do very well in World War One. But anyway.
I mean,
South Tyrol you're on about,
yeah. I mean,
South Tyrol originally was Austrian,
Isn't there a part of Italy which has like Slovenians or something like that, or some Slavic?
City of Trieste. How was it?
Trieste, Trieste sounds right. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like sort of like a mix of like a Slavic group as well. So.
Yeah, the problem with that area was after the Second World War, the Yugoslav communists, they chucked out all the Italians, and we all had to go to Trieste. So you can imagine the genetic area are a mix of like Croatian and Italian, and perhaps some Germanic, because you got from Northern Italians. Well, then again, it was controlled by Venice, so I don't know.
But it's also worth pointing out that, like, southern Italy, for example, was Greek for a very long time. Even when Rome was fairly big, Greek was still quite a big language in southern Italy.
Yeah, because the Eastern Roman Empire still held on to
all of the Eastern. This is one of the things people get wrong. People don't realize that the so-called Byzantine Empire, which is really the Eastern Roman Empire, people don't realize that was part of the Roman Empire. And yes, it was split in half, but they were still allied, mostly allied, to be fair. The Eastern Roman Empire, even when it was united, the east of the Roman Empire was always Greek-speaking, basically. But of course, all educated men, they spoke Greek and Latin.
Yeah, Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations book all in Greek. I believe like Koine Greek. I don't know what the difference is between Koine Greek. I think because you've got two forms of Greek, like there's two forms of Latin. For Latin, you've got classical Latin, which is like very educated, formal. But you've got vulgar Latin, which is like a common speech in like markets and so on. Same with Greek, where you got, I believe, like classical Greek, like for example, Alexander the Great with Aristotle, Socrates. Well, perhaps Socrates would have spoken perhaps the Koine Greek, as it's called, which is like more informal. I could be wrong about it. I don't know if Koine Greek is informal, because I mean Marcus Aurelius wrote in it, so I imagine it's formal. But yeah, so like,
I mean, all the height of the Roman Empire, all educated Romans spoke Greek and Latin. They all did, because you had to be an educated Roman. But the eastern half of the Roman Empire, even when the whole thing was united, was always basically Greek speaking in terms of the common people. Always was.
Yeah, it's like the Pontic Greeks who used to live in like part of Turkey before they all got chucked out. Like they still call themselves Romaioi to this day, which means Roman in Greek.
Yep.
So they have like a really long memory of the Roman Empire, even amongst like the Greeks who used to populate Western and northeastern Turkey before, of course, World War One and all the Greeks getting chucked out.
I mean, I would say that there is. I remember when I was one of my first jobs, there was this really attractive Greek girl, waitress, and she had like this backpack which had the, the Roman, I guess like the sort of Eastern Roman double eagle. You know the one I mean?
Yep.
Yeah, she had that, with the Cairo symbol on it.
Fair enough. Yep, that was also a Byzantine thing, but you have to realize that Byzantine was only it's a modern label that was basically put on the Eastern Roman Empire by mostly German historians, actually, in the 19th century. But they were really the Eastern Romans. And for most of Byzantine's history, they called themselves Romans, even though they were speaking Greek.
I mean, the one thing that's quite interesting is, again, going back to Charles Oman, there wasn't like a standard ethnic unity within the Eastern Roman, like really, like the early Eastern Roman Empire, at least, because you had at this point, like when you had the collapse of the Western half, when Romulus Augustus was ousted, you had the Kingdom of Italy under Odoacer, and you had and then of course you had the Isaurians, who were from what's modern day, I guess you could say, southern Turkey, sort of the region that enters the Kurdish regions, and they was, even though they were Greek, they spoke Greek and culture, Greek, the ethnicity. I mean, the slightly different ethnicity. But they were seen, because they were like mountain people. They were like these mountain men. They were seen as barbarians. They were very much referred to as barbarians, and they took over the Eastern Roman military, and then eventually, and aspects of the clergy, the elites, and then eventually, Zeno was one of them. He became emperor. And the people of Constantinople, of Byzantium, the I guess what you would call the true Byzantines, the people who lived in the case of Byzantium, and the Thracians and the Greeks of the Aegean, were absolutely horrified that this barbarian Greeks were governing. There was absolutely because they were very much viewed as these in some ways viewed as foreigners.
Yeah, I don't know. Look, I'm a fan of the Roman Empire, as should be obvious to anyone who listens to me for any length of time. And I'm certainly, because people have been talking about AA in the chat, and I remember AA trying to say, no, the Byzantines were not Romans, and eventually that argument, even AA had to give up on that one because he just was wrong. The Eastern Romans were the Eastern Romans. You know?
I want to apologise if my voice sounds a bit funny, if I sound like I'm slurring. I discovered I'm allergic to shellfish. Well, I developed an allergy to shellfish.
Oh, that's no good, mate. That's no good.
Yeah.
You can't eat. You mean you can't eat oysters or mussels?
I know. I love them. I love oysters, and I love crab and lobster and all that sort of stuff.
Well, I hope you get over that, mate, because that's losing a joy from life. But anyway,
I know it's shocking.
hopefully, hopefully you'll get over it.
So I know with the Eastern Romans, sort of, I mean, you have the Russians who still who call themselves the Third Rome, because it's like you had because they took on the mantle of the church after Constantinople fell to the Ottomans.
Yes, it did.
And it's like, and like the thing about you do get like a lot of like Russian admiration for the like Byzantines, because that's the thing. Like, Vladimir the Great, who converted to Rustic Christianity and married Basil the Bulgar Slayer's sister. So it's kind of like the Byzantine Empire. Its greatest success in a way was converting the Russian people to Christianity, because doing so meant that Christianity bulwark on the Eurasian steppe, because that's why, for example, Christianity is all over Eurasia because of the Russian Empire. So I'd say that's the biggest success of the Eastern Roman Empire.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly did spread Christianity all eventually all through the Russian lands, for sure, 100%.
Yeah, it's not just that. I mean, you also have like you'll get like these far eastern tribes in Russia, which like they'll have like even though they're pagan, they'll have like a picture of Jesus, like because they celebrate him as like one of their pantheon, oddly enough. Similar to what the Anglo-Saxons did when we were converting. That at first we just added Jesus to a pantheon. We didn't exactly just dump all the gods straight away. So
I say the funny thing is, at the Aztecs, Montezuma did that as well when the Spanish arrived. It was like, oh Jesus, oh yeah, and a lot of Aztecs were sort of add his iconography to their pantheon.
I would just like to address this before we move on to something else. I think that's a while. Right. The Australian has been talking to Mitch in the chat and saying how much he likes English and English as a Germanic language and how it's changed and all the rest of it. I will say this again publicly because I've said it to Mitch before. Mitch, if you want to do a stream on how English has changed over the years, which would be your stream, because I will not be able to add much to it, really, apart from common sense stuff. But I can add some common sense stuff to it. But if you want to do a stream on like that, I will absolutely host you to do it, because I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, I'll be open to it. I just don't know.
If you want to do it, mate, just tell me, and I will absolutely set it up, and we'll do it, because I think that would be interesting, actually. Tomb of Arminius is saying fish and chips is dying in Australia, replaced with endless Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese restaurants. Well, Tomb of Arminius, I live in the outskirts of Melbourne, and I had fish and chips yesterday for lunch. So there we go. But anyway, carry on. Beg your pardon, guys.
Oh, I was going to say, is it? I can't remember if it's Anglo-Saxon or I think it's Old English. The Lord's Prayer in Old English. You can find clips of it online. People translating
you
it.
You should be talking to Mitch about this, mate, not me, because I'm not.
Yeah, I was going to say. It's quite interesting because every time, I remember when I first listened to it. Number one, how sort of it's how Germanic it sounds, obviously, but it also reminded me of the Black speech from Lord of the Rings. I don't know if that was the film adaptation. That is, I'm not referring to the book, but more like the film adaptation.
It's ironic because I think black speech, like the language of Mordor, was actually based on Turkish, I believe, or Hungarian or something like that. Like, whereas,
Really?
yeah, because the Tolkien, I mean, because I think like the choice of role here in Minas Tirith was inspired by the Winged Hussars at the Battle of Vienna, and then you get Elvish in terms of like, because you got the Elvish spoken in the films, which is called Sindarin, which is more Welsh, like
Yes.
more like Welsh. But then you get the Eldarin or the Quenya, which is more Finnish, and then you've got the Rohan, which is clearly just a very Anglo-Saxon thing. Then you got the Hobbiton, which is very English, like very rural English.
Yep.
You got Kingdom of Arnor.
Gents, could I ask you to do me a favor? I need to go to the bathroom. I'll be back in like 3 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, as Victor Clare said, agglutinative, which means I don't know how best to explain this without like practical examples, but essentially you glue suffixes onto words to give it further meaning. Like how we got the word carelessness, you have the original word care, then you add the suffix less to make careless, and then to make careless a concept, you then add the suffix ness to make it a concept. I don't know how best to explain that quirk of languages because we don't have it in English really as a concept.
I mean, I know the Normans when you had the Normans and the Angevins, there was like this forced changing like of phasing out of Anglo-Saxon words and names. Like Wilfred became William, that sort of stuff, you know.
Yeah, so for example, you got the name Audrey for women, but Audrey in Old Anglo-Saxon was Ethelfled. I don't know how the French get Audrey from that, but apparently that's where Audrey comes from. It's like a French changing of that name. Then you got the name Robert, which in Old English was Hudbert, because there used to be a guttural H sound, and then then we just phased that out because of the Norman name didn't have such a guttural H sound, and also because the Normans found it hard to pronounce that guttural sound that Old English used to have. So
I would say with the French one, I might be able to answer the Audrey one because I think when the Salian Franks amalgamated into the Latin, the majority Latin Gaul at the time, I wonder if again, as we said, the Saxons and the Salian Franks, but and the Ripuarian Franks were they were ethnically similar, near enough. I say near enough identical. I mean, there were some differences, but they were similar because they were neighbours. I do wonder if that was the route where you had, the same names, but how they became like Frank, Latinized instead of like Saxon. That's
so,
how the.
Yeah, you do get names where you got William, which I think I don't think Anglo-Saxon had a name like William. We had to bring it in from the French because the Germans have a name Wilhelm, and a William is an original Germanic name. It's just we didn't really have it in Old Anglo-Saxon until
wasn't Wilf. What I don't know if it was direct translation, but I know that there were. I can't remember which. I think it was Mark Morris in the History of Anglo-Saxon. He sort of said a lot of people called Wilfred were by the Normans referred to as William. So I don't know if that's a.
Oh no, so William has the same root as the German word Wilhelm, which because Wilfred translates as you got Will, and then Fred comes from the Germanic word Frieden, or in Old English would be Frith, to mean peace, whereas Wilhelm or William meant will and helmet, or protector. Helm had the general meaning of like protector or defender, much like helmets defend your head these days. So I suppose the Normans didn't have their own version of Wilfred, so they just stooped to William instead.
Yeah.
It's like Edward. Edward in Anglo-Saxon is a guard or a warrior, basically.
Yeah, because
which is why it's a common English king's name.
Yeah, it's like or you get I mean there are some Anglo-Saxons which is still kept on. and the pronunciation hasn't really changed that much. Like the Normans just kind of adopted them, like Edmund, Edward, Alfred.
Yep.
What else? My name, Mitchell. That's an old Anglo-Saxon name.
Cool. Cool.
Yeah. Apparently, because Alfred the Great, like the Great part, would translate as Mitchell. So my name literally means great or big in old Anglo-Saxon. Apparently.
Which is good.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, I'm gonna say I've got that. What other names? I mean, you got yeah. Then you got for women's names. Women's names were a lot more diluted, I reckon, by the Norman conquest. Although it took a lot longer for women's names from Anglo-Saxon to be phased out by more French names. So, for example, Ethelflaed turns into Audrey. We still keep names like Edel. I mean, not Edel. Edith. You got the name Ethel, which Ethel means the same as Adele in German. They both mean honourable for woman.
But wouldn't that have been Ethelfred originally, though, Mitch?
I'm talking about girls' names, so like Ethel as like.
What Hilda? That was an Anglo-Saxon name, wasn't it? Hilda an Anglo-Saxon name?
Yeah, you also have a name Matilda.
Hilda's German as well, so yeah, probably would have.
Yeah, Mildred. Yeah.
You got Matilda, which is also the name of the one queen who because
Empress Matilda. Empress Matilda married to Geoffrey of Anjou. Yeah.
Yeah, so some Anglo-Saxon female names, some of them kept on, but other names like Isabel and Catherine kind of seeped in over time, which
yeah. One thing I found quite interesting with the Franks was that by the 8th, 9th century, their sort of like Germanic names became more sort of ceased, and you had like Charles, and you had
it's like because you had Carl, and then he turns into Charles for some reason. I don't know how the Franks accomplished that name. Well, you got the name Clovis, which I think comes from Latin, I believe. But he was like the last Frankish king to convert.
Clovis he was the first Christian. Clovis would have been a Latin base for sure.
Yeah,
it's like the same with the Anglo-Saxon kings. A lot of them had like Celtic names. Like, for example, Alfred the Great had ancestry coming from an Anglo-Saxon warlord by the name of Cerdich or Cherdich, which was a Celtic name. Or you got King Penda of Mercia, who was the last pagan king of Mercia. Penda is an Anglo-Saxon; it's a Celtic name. So,
Mitch, what about, just out of interest, because I'm a complete ignoramus on this kind of stuff. What about girls' names like Elizabeth and Victoria? Where would they come from?
Victoria has the same roots as our word victory from Latin. I mean, Elizabeth's a Jewish name, I believe, like from Hebrew, I believe. But I mean,
like biblical name sort of thing.
Yeah, biblical. I can't remember.
It would have come from the Bible. That makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, it's like
had a panic attack.
I mean, so what was it with Franklin or someone else who said like he named his children after non-biblical names, like he didn't want biblical names for his children or something. I can't remember, it was something like Franklin, but there's some biblical names which are all right. Like I don't know, Elizabeth is all right, even though it's not Indo-European at all as a name.
I mean, I guess Enoch is no longer an acceptable biblical name. Anymore.
I mean, I don't think I would call any son of. I mean, it's something I wouldn't call a son of my child. I'll just call him Carl. Although that's not exactly no mod. I don't know. So, I mean, the word Carl has the same words as our word churl, oddly enough, which means peasant in Old Anglo-Saxon.
Yep.
Like, because it's like a churl was like the old.
Even though there's an Austrian emperor, Carl, but yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I've always liked the name Alwyn. I've always liked that one.
Yeah, I mean, I've been searching up Welsh names, like Meredith. I thought Meredith was an Anglo-Saxon name.
Meredith's quite pretty. Yeah, that's quite a pretty name.
Yeah, it's a pity it's not used more. I mean, the only reason I know of that name also I looked up like random Puritan people, and there were women called Meredith, for example, as a common name back in the 17th century. So that's one name I'd bring back. We're going to name Edith, which can come back. I mean, you got the name Adele, which that's the thing. Like we've already got but the native form of Adele was Ethel, but Adele is a German name, but it means the same as Ethel. It means noble. or honourable in terms of a woman. So,
I mean, going back to Clovis, one thing that's quite interesting is that the when he was baptized and he became a Christian, he was given by the Latin. Effectively, he was known by the Latin people as Clovis, but by the Germanic people, he was still by like his birth name that was what was it? What was it? Holdwig. It was Holdwig.
I'm trying to think now. I mean, I know like there was one Anglo-Saxon figure by Charlemagne's court called Alcuin. I don't know where Alcuin as a name comes from, because it doesn't exactly sound Anglo-Saxon to me. It could be a Celtic name or something. Perhaps it's just like a French perversion of his name or something from Old English. But yeah.
I mean, because one thing that's quite thing is Gregory of Tours actually did like transcribe Merovingian, so these would have been Franks, like their Germanic names to Latin. So you had like an Arnulfus, Gundabus, Fredrigindus. You had all like these sort of really sort of Germanic Latinized names, which I guess were shortened. You just had Arnulf. I think Arnulf became like a Germanic one later on.
Yeah, it's like you got the I know you got Arminius, which in German is Hermann. So I don't think we have an English name like that. I don't think Herman's a name in Ireland. I mean, it might be in America, but not over here.
Guys, I think this is interesting, and like I said, I'd be very, very keen to do a stream on this stuff. But I'm conscious that we've been going for over an hour and a half, and we have not really addressed any current issues. So
good.
Which is probably good, guys. I'm not saying it isn't, to be honest.
Well, we did talk briefly about the Russian LGBT ban. So
we did talk about that, absolutely right, and I think that's worth noting that Putin has basically banned LGBTQ stuff in Russia, and good on him. Wish our leaders would do that.
What do you mean, Andrew? We're talking about linguistic changes of the 8th and 9th century. That is current news, relatively speaking. It's not that long ago.
Look, I do agree with you guys, and like I said, I'll happily do a stream on this stuff. But for those people who might tune in to hear about current stuff a little bit, I just think we should talk a little bit about some current issues, because it's not like there aren't any.
Well, it's like we've got stuff in Ireland, which
I think go for it, guys. Go for it. Yep.
Well, it's like Morgoth had the best point to say, where he said the Irish government has just been very inept about it. But just crushing with dissent, too much of it iron fist, and not enough like how the British government will do it through psyops and a velvet glove.
Yep.
So, and then there is a question of whether Conor McGregor is going to get done for what he was posting amidst all the riots. Well, on that particular night.
Well, so, I'm sure Conor McGregor didn't do any of that, frankly. But I mean, Conor McGregor is extremely popular in Ireland and elsewhere.
Well, he did say we were at war, so that's of him. I might try and say that.
Is he wrong? Is he wrong?
I'm not saying he's wrong. I'm saying, you know what the enemy will be like. They'll twist his words and show him up in court or whatever. But because I mean, that's what they're trying to do. Do I think they should do it?
But I think if they do that, I think they will make a major mistake, because he's very popular in Ireland. He's also very popular in lots of other places.
Okay, and Leo Varadkar literally spent the morning after those riots blaming all Irish men for the fact that Irish women feel unsafe on their own streets. And you just end up thinking to yourself, this is just like, as Morgoth said, it's like there's a crisis of competence within the Irish elite already. And Lady of Shot said something along the lines of like they're relatively new to this compared to the likes of Tony Blair and all those who came before, like Harold Wilson and whatnot.
And of course, the Irish Taoiseach is actually not fully Irish. He's
he's homosexual Indian. So
he's a homosexual Indian. Yes, I do believe. Yes. So So who's he to stand there and tell Irish men what Irish women are scared of? You know, I don't get that, to be honest. My guess is most Irish women won't be scared of real Irish men.
I'm sorry. Okay. The leader of the AFD is like one of the leaders, joint leaders, is like a lesbian, right? You got the Taoiseach, who is like a gay half Indian. You got the British Prime Minister, who's like some
total Hindu banker.
Hindu banker. I mean,
don't forget the Scottish First Minister.
Oh, a Scottish First Minister who's like
Pakistani in a kilt.
Pakistani in a kilt who
can't ride a scooter.
Wants to bring the population of Gaza over to D-side or wherever.
Yeah, absolutely. Edinburgh and Glasgow will be improved by 50,000 Palestinians. Of course they will.
And I mean, we all know that. I mean, number one, with these three characters, there's a deep ethnic resentment against the native populations because they do have.
Yes.
There is just, let's be honest, there's a deep ethnic resentment. Now, who are the people that fuel that resentment? Well, we do know who do that. You know, Chat knows, everyone knows.
Everyone knows, and we don't need to name them, AI, because we're on YouTube.
Yeah, but we all know.
But at the moment, they are fighting a fierce war in Gaza.
But my point is, you have all these different groups, and what they're doing is they're effectively having like it's, I have to say, it's the most schizo, like, ethnic ethnic sort of governance policy going, because you invite third worlders over which hate your guts, whether you be Hindu or what else, because a lot of them are Muslims. They're not Hindus, they're coming in Muslims, but you invite them over and then you act surprised when they play up over here or in Ireland or wherever.
You know, when they put their dirty shoes all over our war memorials that are supposed to be sacred and stuff like this. Yeah, I mean,
I didn't get to come on your anniversary stream last week, but one thing I think Morgoth, I think a lot of people on the right have talked who have been saying, a lot of these people, and I'm not talking about the Hindus, but the other sort of people, have been acting surprised. Where is the establishment? Why are a lot of people on the right not coming out? Why isn't there enough people, English people, Americans, other Europeans, coming out to support them? It's because I think a lot of people deep down realize that you've brought the problem here. And where were you when we had BLM? Where we've had where you've had decades of government policy which have been. We know the articles in the Guardian, the BBC about internal whiteness, how whiteness is affecting this, how we need to have less white people. White people need to shut up. We know these articles.
In a white Anglo-Catholic country, which is Britain, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, I'm getting the impression on the street level in my local community, among the real British population, nobody cares about Gaza either way. They don't care. They don't care what happens. But what they don't like is, and there's one person in my work that he doesn't like all. I mean, he didn't really word it in the way that I would, but effectively he doesn't like two foreign groups playing out their wars on our streets. That's his basic point on that.
And who should?
And exactly, I mean that should be the normal, sensible position of every mainstream talking point politician, whether it be in any party, every part. That should be the normal point. But that point,
I don't give two shits about hatreds that are either ancient or go back to 1948 in the Middle East. I don't care about them. Shouldn't concern British people or Australian people or even Americans. It should not.
But the thing is that is now considered to be far right madness, and that sort of attitude, which was why people in Ireland and Dublin were so angry was because they see that sort of, I mean, that sort of barbarity was played out on their street, and they responded in, you know, what I guess how the Irish would respond if we're absolutely honest. And you know, now they're getting the taste of actually global power, that because they are not backing the established, and many times for many Irish nationalists, this is probably the first time they're actually gone rogue against the establishment wishes, because before it used to be like, oh, we'll target the Brits, you know, target the evil English or whatever.
I have noticed AI over the past, certainly the past 5 years, but probably actually about the past 10 years, really, that more and more genuine Irish nationalists have come to see that Britain might not actually be their worst enemy.
Well, I did a stream. If you go on my channel, AI.
Sorry, let me change that. The British people might not be their worst enemy.
Yeah,
what I mean.
yeah. If you go on my channel, AI Tory, one of my first videos that was back in 2020, I actually predicted this. That I said, you know, they'll effectively. I said Scottish and Welsh nationalism is just a progressive. I said it was like a progressive socialist project to, you know, that was didn't really care about the national interests of the people there. It was just about pushing, you know, left wing policies. I said Irish nationalism. I even back then I said it was basically just closely aligned to America and the global West, similar. But I did say there was something to it in the sense because there was Irish Republic founded in, you know, on this, you know, revolution, also I say civil war. That there is something to that, but the thing there is, I said ultimately their hatred for the English, and the reason they hate the English, and, you know, the idea of the monarchy and things, these are founded on American republicanism. And I said that
the original founders of the IRA were much more in America. They were Irish guys who had moved to America, but they were
Irish
much more. Yeah, but they were much more Irish diaspora in America than they were in Ireland. Like Ireland, even Dublin in 1916 during the uprising, most of the Dubliners didn't support the IRA. They didn't.
No, they didn't. No, even afterwards. And also, if you go to, like, again, one big myth that we're always told in the Irish Republic was that because of the radical nature of the IRA, that, you know, during the Spanish Civil War, there they supported. There was a lot of support in Ireland for the Republican. I mean, no, there wasn't. Absolutely not. The majority of support was behind Franco and the nationalists, because at that time, I mean, even up until when I was born,
Ireland was still mildly
devout
fashy and mildly fashy. Yes, it was.
It was a devout Catholic nation. It was very white, and it was a devout Catholic nation. And yes, there was a lot of deep hatred. You had a lot of, you know, issues with the Northern Ireland, but even then, same thing as well. But now, if you look at it, it's you know.
I tell you, look, to slightly change the trajectory of this, let's look at the guys who called for everyone to go and defend our sacred war memorials, right? And don't get me wrong, I don't think grubby Palestinians and other immigrants should be putting their filthy shoes over our war memorials. I think the cops should bash them off with batons and they should all get 5 years in jail and be deported. That's what I would do to them, all right? So I don't agree with them putting their grubby, filthy shoes over our war memorials at all. But the point is, who originally called for this? Well, Douglas Murray. Where is Douglas Murray? Where was he on the day of those protests he called for? He was in Israel. He's still in Israel. Yeah. He's still in Israel. And he's now quoting stuff in Hebrew that I can't read because I can't read Hebrew, being an Englishman. And you know, this guy is such a con. It's unbelievable. And Tommy Robinson now, people talk about Tommy Robinson. And of course, he turned up at the demonstration, then disappeared in a specially designed taxi. But then he got arrested by the cops and then told he's not allowed to go to London anymore. Is this because Tommy Robinson is a working class bloke and Douglas Murray is a gay middle class bloke? Is this why? Do you think maybe they are treated slightly differently?
I think the problem.
And
was
I'm
Tommy
not a supporter of Tommy Robinson. Don't get me wrong.
No,
but you know, I don't think we have a two-tier police system. I think we have like a three-tier police system with white straight men at the bottom.
I don't know if it was the working class. I number one, the protest that he went to, the pro-Israel protest that he went to, was an establishment. It was like a neocon demo.
Of course it was.
You had Boris, had Boris, you had Julie Hartley Brewer, you had all those, those establishment figures,
the usual suspects.
And I think Morgoth summed it up as like this was an establishment shindig. He wasn't invited. He was told not to come. He turned up, and they basically locked him up. There was, of course, he did nothing, but that's not the point. It was he wasn't meant to be there because he was going to cause like narrative effect. And so that's why
exactly, mate. I think Victor Galeros has it right. He says Murray and Robinson have pretty much the same opinions. The difference is the accent and the class, Victor Galeros. If you knew anything much about England, Tommy Robinson's a working class dude, and Douglas Murray is a gay middle class dude. Very different.
I know people have been tagging in the Metropolitan Police when all this is going on, saying, "Are you going to question Douglas Murray for basically?"
But of course they won't. No,
organising. Because he was incited. I mean, I think you could argue strongly that Murray did incite this.
Murray did it more than Robinson did. But there is no way that anything is going to happen to Murray. Trust me. He won't even get called in by the cops when he eventually returns from his beloved Israel, of course.
But the thing is, what they fear the most is that there is genuine spirit within the English people that comes out with and I'm not talking about going out into the streets with Robinson and flying the English flag and then flying a sort of bastardization of the Israeli and English flag together, because that's what the centre right loves. That's what they want.
Totally agree.
The ultimate fear is that effectively what the majority, what people would support is, no, this is England. I don't give a damn about the two Semitic peasants fighting over the Middle East, and that.
100%.
And that's my take.
Neither of them are our friends. The Palestinians are not our friends, nor are the Israelis.
And that's why I can't get on board with a lot of people on the sort of distant who are going like, you got like John Hinckley on Twitter who's going like, oh, look at all these based Muslim armies, and it's like,
no, sorry, no, they're all our enemies. None of them like us. I want them all gone. I did learn something last week though, guys. I learned the term remigration, and that's the term I'm going to use from now on. We need to support the end of mass immigration into all Western nations, and we need to start supporting remigration. That I think is the good term for this.
Yeah.
We need them to remigrate back to where they came from.
As soon as possible.
In as large a numbers as possible. And I think that's a fair term. No, Australian repatriation is not the term. Remigration is the term. It's a harmless term. And that's why I think it's a good term to use.
In the UK, I've actually done like, when you write down like fake government policies, like just to get around it. One policy I'd be looking to implement to actually do that without, boots on the ground, because I think there'd be a lot of people willingly, is you stop people under a certain amount sending money overseas and like their own salary overseas to their families, and also cutting and then sort of banning them from the social housing ladder. I guarantee you that would cut a significant number.
There's that. I do all sorts of things. I'd say like no use of any sort of welfare for 10 years, no use of the NHS except for extreme emergencies for at least 5 or 10 years. I'd do all that stuff immediately. Like I'd make it quite hard to come to Britain. But what we ultimately need is remigration, is what we really need. And I would support that financially, absolutely. I'd help these people to remigrate back to where they came from.
Yeah.
I think it's the only answer ultimately. I mean, you've also got to get your own indigenous birth rates up. You've got to start young men and women having families and having children, which is very difficult when the house prices are so fucking ridiculous.
And you need to know that. I mean, of course, the late great Henry Kissinger, one of his final interviews, he basically said, "Yeah, there's too many black and brown people here."
Well, Kissinger gets a bad rap, I reckon. I mean, compared to the people we have these days, I mean, Kissinger was relatively okay, to be honest.
I mean, he's the one who cajoled the South Africans to cut their ties with Rhodesia, to be fair.
Fair enough. Well, that's a bad thing he did, Mitch, for sure. But honest, compared to the people today, I think
he's a lot more...
Yeah.
Well, he's a lot more Machiavellian compared to the show of shit we've got to live with today. So...
yeah, you're right, Mitch. I mean, but like I said, I think he's a bit more nuanced than any of the people who are running these things today, who to me are just idiots. They're not bright.
Well, he would. I mean, it's like Blinken. I mean, at least he's got the nose to bloody want to kill himself whenever Biden shows himself up, calling him a dictator.
Yeah.
So
well, that's not hard. I mean, Biden.
So
Biden is the first senile leader of the, in inverted commas, free world.
Yeah, so at least Blinken is not completely retarded, but compared to Kissinger, what can you say?
The thing is, I do wonder, because Kissinger, even up to like 100, he was so active in
he was giving
global politics.
Interviews. He was giving interviews like 6 months ago, for fuck's sake. I mean,
yeah, and being involved in publication articles, he was still active, and I do wonder, like, he must make up 90% of at this point 90% of foreign policy action for the US.
I don't think he does anymore, though. Yeah,
well, really not now. No, obviously not now. But
back in the day, yeah. But now, no. The US is like, US foreign policy these days is basically insane as far as I can work out.
But because with him gone, it's going to get a lot worse.
Yeah, it's like it's like America wants to start a war with the whole world. A war they can't win anymore because they don't have enough troops, and the troops they do have are far too diverse.
Yeah, it's going to be like, I mean, I don't know. Oh, what was his name? Chernin, I think his name was, like in Austro-Hungarian foreign minister. It's going to be, I mean, it's going to be similar to him. Like in terms of Kissinger was like the last guy like that. But after he's gone, the ship just completely sinks.
Yeah, also like Tito and people like that in Yugoslavia.
Yeah, so Chernin. Yeah, I know where Chernin. I'm going on. I mean, it's been years since I looked at the First World War in terms of Austro-Hungarians, but you had of course, Austro-Hungarian army completely inept because it's so diverse and all that. But you've also got the government, you've also got the generals who are completely inept. You have the foreign secretary who tries his best to salvage what he can out of a mess of Austro-Hungary amidst, treated with Brest-Litovsk and whatnot, but doomed anyway because everyone knows Austro-Hungary.
One of the things you have to understand about Austro-Hungary is that the Austro-Hungarian army had something like 10 languages they had to use.
Yeah, it's not just that. The problem was, so you have, for example, the Hungarians, most of whom did not speak any other language other than Hungarian, which is tricky because no other language in that area is like Hungarian. So how do you give?
Of course, there
was
was also quite a lot of anti-feeling in Hungary towards Austria.
Yeah, over 1848. Yeah,
yeah. But the point is, if you are trying to run an Austro-Hungarian army, you've got 10 or maybe even 12 languages you have to take account of, and even the Austro-Hungarian navy, because they did have one, because at one stage they had a bit of the sea to the east of Italy. They had like 8 to 9 languages they had to master for their sailors and officers, and that you just can't run a military force that way. You just can't. It's not going to be any good.
Yeah, contrast to Russia, where because with Russia, it's everyone has to learn Russian. Like no Russian bothers trying to learn every single language. It's everyone has to learn Russian. There's no other way around it. Whether you're a Yakut, Buryak, Chechen, Kalmyk, whatever, everyone has to learn Russian. Like no Russian commander is going to try and concern himself with like 200 different languages to communicate with the troops. So,
well, you see, in Italy, in Napoleon's campaigns in Italy, before Egypt, that was the problem the Austrian army faced even then. You know, you had you had the multi-ethnics and the multi-languages, which did cause problems in communication. Something which even Napoleon commentated on. As
Victor Claros in the chat is saying the Austrian Navy was more German. Yes, it was. They had slightly fewer languages to deal with, but also the Austrian Navy had some blokes who spoke Italian. So, you know, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, militarily and navally, had a big problem because of how many ethnic groups they included in the empire. This is why your Romans, for example, made sure everyone spoke Latin or Greek, one or the other. You had to speak one or the other.
I mean, in the Austrian court, in the imperial court during the Napoleonic era, it was quite common that they would speak French. The French would be used. Same in the Russian court as well.
Yeah, Russian court was fully French. Yes, it was absolutely right.
It was fully French.
Read War and Peace. It goes on about that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, in particular, but same in the Austrian one as well, because of that problem. Because a lot of various nobility came from different parts, maybe would not understand each other fully, but also there was elements. I mean, the War and Peace, it was element of sophistication in that, and that would just get me on to the final point I was going to reference before I opted out not seeing Waterloo today in cinema. I could have done
Waterloo or Napoleon, babes?
Sorry, Napoleon. No, it's not Waterloo. Napoleon.
I was going to say.
No,
Napoleon, not Waterloo. Waterloo's a good film. Napoleon is not. Napoleon is a terrible movie.
It's 3 hours long. I didn't want to sit. I saw the reviews. I saw Absolute Majesty's review. I've seen other reviews of it, and there are so many things in it which are not. I mean, forget the historical inaccuracies, but the fact that every motivating reason behind like the conquest of Europe and all that was because of Josephine and her. You get the idea.
Josephine, the story of it should have been called Josephine, not Napoleon, really. But
and it's just so. It so misses the mark. It's offensive. It's offensive because
I watched Apostolic Majesty destroy this film in under an hour. And really, he got very angry about it, and I totally agree with him. And I've watched, I think, about 4 other military historians who I respect, and every single one of them, with no exception, says that Napoleon is one of the worst historical movies ever made. All of them.
All of them have
really been terrible.
Yeah, there's one that I've. There was one who he was usually quite. a mild one. He does sort of like total, like Napoleon Total War. He did like, he talks about it on one of his streams, and he usually doesn't get cross or anything. He's just like, yeah, it's a load of shit. He walked out of the cinema. It was like terrible. And even like he was like, this is absolute rubbish. And I've for me, there's one scene I have seen, like old clips people have been putting up, and there's one scene of like him. He's in Moscow, and his his generals call him out onto this balcony, and he says, and Moscow, of course, is all burning, and he says, "Who's done this?" And they spawn themselves, says the Russians, and then he goes, "No, seriously, who's done this?" It goes, "It's the Russians," and he goes, "Huh. Well, fine. I'll march on St. Petersburg and let them burn St. Petersburg and everything else." In reality, though, Napoleon was actually
he never could do that. Yeah.
Well, no, he could never do that. But also, in reality, Napoleon was actually quite shaken by the burning of Moscow, because he actually realised how far the Russians would go. He was actually quite disturbed by it.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he was. He realized he wasn't going to get his one decisive battle, and then the Russians were going to come crawling to him for a peace treaty, which is what he always depended on.
Yeah, because he knew that he'd overstretched from the road from Minsk to Moscow. Yeah. He knew that it was way overstretched, and he didn't consolidate, which is one thing he always used to reiterate in Italy and everywhere else, was consolidation. And he went against his own rules in some ways with the Russian campaign.
Well, I mean, not only that, AI, but I mean, like the Napoleonic system of warfare basically depended on stealing the food of the peasants through any land you went through. They did it in the peninsula with the Spanish and Portuguese peasants when they could. They did it in Italy. They did it in Austria all the time. They did it in Germany all the time. And of course, in Russia, it was more and more difficult because Russia was poorer. The Napoleonic system absolutely depended on their soldiers stealing food from the local peasants. So the local peasants ended up starving or nearly starving. And it was never going to work in Russia with their winters and all the rest of it. But the film Napoleon is a Ridley Scott movie, and Ridley Scott's last film was The Last Duel, and The Last Duel was an absolutely, totally feminist movie. It's told totally from a feminist point of view. It's entirely biased. It's entirely crap. The armor in the film is rubbish. All the historical stuff in that film is rubbish. And he's just carried on with this movie because it should be called Josephine, not Napoleon. And it's got things like the British using sniper rifles with scopes in 1815. When the very first sniper rifles came around during the American Civil War in 1861 onwards. And Napoleon leading a cavalry charge against the British at Waterloo, which is ridiculous.
That was the other one. Yeah, it was ridiculous.
It's a crap movie, and I would not waste any money seeing it. In fact, I wouldn't even go and see it if someone said to me, "I'll give you £100, Ted, go and watch it." I'd still say no, thank you. I'd do better things with 2 hours.
I mean, what I've done is, the director, that Soviet director of Waterloo, Sergei
Bondarchuk,
He, of course, he directed the 4-parter epic of War and Peace,
which is also very good. Yeah, the Borodino stuff in that is really well done.
I mean, the Battle of Borodino is incredible. What was the other battle? I think it was in the first film. I don't think it wasn't Austerlitz. It might have been Austerlitz.
No, it would have been a one around the Russian town. I can't remember what it was called now.
Vyazma or
Smolensk. Smolensk. Might have been Smolensk actually. Smolensk.
I mean, that one is incredible, and at least with his work, with that director's work, at least if you ever watch Waterloo or even War and Peace, every single image, it's like a technical director thing, every single image is like a painting. It's like you can actually see that painting.
It's not up to the standard of Barry Lyndon, where they really are. Like in Barry Lyndon, every single frame in that film is like an 18th century painting. It's the dude you're talking about who directed Waterloo. He's not up to that standard, but Waterloo and War and Peace are immensely better films than Scott's Napoleon, which is a travesty.
I mean, with War and Peace, though, one thing that he wanted to do more so, I would say, over Kubrick was, I mean, he wanted to show like the scale of and I think it's been discussed recently, the modern concept of total war. He wanted to show literally the horde of Napoleon's army, and at Borodino, you see the full scale of Napoleon's army, which is, and you have to remember, in War and Peace, the one thing that Napoleon's often referred to contemporary at the time as like the demon, the Antichrist. A lot of people actually thought he was the Antichrist at that time. Yeah, all that sort of stuff. And when you actually see War and Peace in that version, and you see like the scale of that army and the absolute, the hive mind and the actual the discipline, some level of discipline within the elite units like the old guards and what have you, you actually see probably what a lot of people were frightened of, because in that time that sort of warfare was very much new. And and of course, as we know, the Russians would retreat. They'd retreat beyond Moscow, abandon Moscow, set it on fire. And it really was the weather that and basically the poor logistics of the French army that turned the tide.
The French logistics were always shit because, like I said, the French Napoleonic system, which was developed from the revolutionary system, depended on stealing food from the local peasants and making them starve or semi-starve. Always did. And yeah, absolutely right. But I mean, Napoleon knew it was going to snow roughly when it was going to snow. Weather forecasts were not then like they are now. But on the other hand, they also didn't have so-called global warming then, which is a bigger con today than they ever had. But he knew roughly it was going to snow when it was going to snow, he was just dependent on having this big battle and the Russians come crawling to him for a peace treaty, where in fact, of course, Russia is such a huge country that they can afford to trade space for time, which most nations can't because they're not big enough.
Yeah, it's like the Russians did that to the Swedish in the Great Northern War, which is why the Battle of Poltava ends up so one-sided for the Russians, was because the Swedish army just wasted. When you consider Poltava is such a long way from Swedish territory as well, so you can imagine how bad it was for Napoleon. I suppose he had Poland to help him, but it wasn't really a country in the same way that
But he had quite a lot of Polish troops. He did, because he set up the Duchy of Warsaw, which was semi-independent. But Napoleon was in my humble opinion, Napoleon was an evil bastard. I'm sorry, he just was. He didn't care how many Frenchmen he killed.
I wouldn't say evil. I'll just say
his glory.
I'd say cold. I don't think he was just. I don't think he was evil. I'd say very callous and not very cold-hearted.
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't say evil though. I won't say evil. I think.
But Napoleon came out with all this stuff about his soldiers and I love you soldiers and blah and blah and blah and all this crap. All right. Whereas Wellington, who was quite tough with his soldiers sometimes, like he flogged quite a lot of them and he hung a few when they were doing bad stuff like looting and raping and so on. But Wellington was seen in tears twice at the casualties of his men at the siege of Badajoz and after Waterloo. Wellington was supposed to be this heartless bastard. He was reduced to tears twice at how many men his army had lost under his command. You can't even conceive of that ever happening with Napoleon, because he just regarded his men as ants. Really?
Well, yeah. That's the thing. It was like because he was also an artilleryman, which that's the thing. Like being an artilleryman, you're a lot more distanced away from the slaughter compared to let's say you as a light infantryman. So
I mean,
there's that.
the only way that he was given he would gain that image was the siege of Toulon, where he did actually. If you want to talk about an incident where he did lead a charge, he did lead a charge
on foot,
not horse, on foot, and I think he was shot by an English sergeant, or he was bayoneted by an English sergeant, or something like that.
Yeah, sadly, the good English sergeant didn't kill the bastard, but there we go.
Yeah, it hit him in the thigh.
Yeah, if only he had killed him, Europe would have been saved many, many, many deaths.
I mean, the only thing I would say about the film is that there is like strong emphasis, like the Napoleon goes around and says, "Oh, I'm the hero of Toulon." I mean, he did go around parties. It's documented. He did go around parties and say, "Yeah, I'm the hero of Toulon," but people knew that tale because France had taken so many defeats. I guess there weren't that many victories against the British in the south, in particular, and there was that one rare occasion where he did prevail, where the French Republic prevailed, and also ultimately during the Reign of Terror there weren't that many officers left. I mean, Napoleon was sensible, and this is one thing you know the instance where Robespierre was basically declared a traitor by the National Assembly, and him and his faction were purged.
Rightly. Far too late, but rightly.
This is the thing. Napoleon, days before that happened, left Paris, and he went. Well, this is the thing. He went to, I think it was Marseille, in the south. And it was said, I remember I got this book, and the author sort of interjects, and he says, one of Napoleon's political advisors at the time, commentating, retrospectively, very much thought if Napoleon was in Paris at the time, he would have been rounded up with the rest of them.
Yeah. I mean, look, he wasn't remember the whiff of grape shot, which was Napoleon basically shooting down Parisian pro-royalist demonstrators.
Yes.
Totally ruthless again. Napoleon was totally ruthless against royalists in various peripheral parts of France. Totally ruthless against those guys.
I mean,
he was not a good man by any. Look, he was by no means a Hitler or a Stalin or a Chairman Mao. He wasn't in that class at all in terms of mass deaths. But he was probably the most evil man in Europe prior to those people.
I really don't see him as evil, to be honest. I'm going to.
He killed an awful lot. Look, even if
everyone's killed people, Julius Caesar probably killed a lot of Gauls. Anglo-Saxons killed a lot of Celts. But everyone's killed one another.
Mitch, yeah, absolutely, Mitch. But if you're pro-French, let's say, Julius Caesar killed a lot of Gauls. He didn't kill that many Romans, right? But Napoleon killed vast numbers of Frenchmen over 20 years.
Okay, so would you describe Purvis of Epirus
for no purpose at all except his own glory?
Okay, so Purvis of Epirus, who was a Greek general fighting against the Romans, would you describe him as evil then? Because he got so many Greeks died under his command every time he gained a victory.
I'm sorry, which general and when was that, Mitch?
Purvis of Epirus.
Epirus. No, he nearly won I mean, he was. If I'm thinking he's the same guy, he was the guy where we get the term "a horrific victory" from, wasn't he?
Yeah, because every time he won a victory, he'd always have heavy casualties fighting.
Yeah, but he beat the Romans several times, but he didn't lose. He didn't lose more men than the Romans. He just lost as many.
We did mention Clovis, the Frankish king, the first, who united the Frankish tribes. Now, the tribes that he united were made up of like the Rippium, all these various tribes along the what's now eastern France, but it was controlled by his extended family. And the way that he did that was basically declaring war, a lifetime of war against the other Franks and his family, and literally just like butchering his uncles, nephews, like even in one case, like battering a baby to death.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, you could argue that is like an evil act. And bear in mind, he was a Christian technically at that point.
Yeah.
Fair enough,
and he was condemned by the church for such acts. I mean,
fair enough. Can I just say to Jules Roy in the chat? Jules Roy is saying Betty Blue, which is a movie, by the way, is for perverts. Shame on you, Iron Duke. Alice Liddell, 1872, asked for films she could watch when she was trying to learn French. Betty Blue gives you contemporary French. And the chick's quite cute. Is it a film for perverts? Not really. There's not much perverted in that movie, to be honest with you. Betty Blue's pretty mentally ill as a girl, but I don't know what the perversion in that movie is, Jules Roy, to be honest. So there we go. But it is a good way to listen to contemporary French. I beg your pardon, guys. Do carry on.
I mean, King Otto of Mercia had to kill off a lot of his male relatives when he climbed the throne, because the thing was, every time a Mercian king died, every male in the family, a Mercian royal family, would fight each other until there was only one left. Same with what happened with Kievan Rus, where every time as a grand prince of the Kievan Rus died, the sons would just fight each other until only one was left. So Clovis doing those sort of acts against his own family, I mean, that's just the morality of the time. So
I mean, also like even the Ottomans up until the early modern period, the Ottoman court would the brothers, of the Sultan,
they would all kill each other. Yeah.
And also it's common.
Hang on, guys. Hang on. I'm sorry. I must address it. Jules Roy says she kisses a naked man's penis. Mate, if that is perverted to you, then I pity you. I'm sorry. But that's all I can say about that. So there we go. Carry on, gents. Carry on.
I mean, the Ottomans were famous because in feudal in Western Europe, it's quite common for the princes or relatives, they'll be given titles, the Earl of this or that, or there'll be a Prince of Wales, that sort of stuff, right? In the Ottoman court, though, the sons and brothers would be literally given nothing. they wouldn't receive really any titles unless they're like maybe like a military title, but not like a formal title. That's why there was a lot of high, there was a lot of stake for a lot of the gears who would come out on top. And then of course you had like the janissaries and who would later on play quite a prominent role in deciding the successors. But I think those sorts of I do think that sort of way of doing stuff that does hold one back, and I think it's one of the right reasons why the Ottomans didn't really fare well as time went on, because I know that you talk about like before the First World War, the sick man of Europe, but they were the sick man of Europe for a long time, quite a long time.
The Turks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they were propped up by the Brits because the Brits didn't want the Russian Navy in the Med, and so long as the Turks controlled the Dardanelles, that the Russians couldn't get into the Med. But that was the only reason the Brits propped them up. That was the only reason, you know. And at that time, the only threat to British India, etc., was the Russians.
Yeah, and we propped up the Greeks and the emerging Hellenic states. I mean,
against the Turks because they were Christians. So we did, yes.
Yes.
In fact, the British and Russians and French together destroyed the Turkish fleet in order to make sure that the Greeks got independence at the Battle of Solferino. I think it was Solferino. No, not Solferino.
Navarino.
Navarino. Thank you very much, Mitch. Yeah, Navarino. At the Battle of Navarino. And that was the Brits, the Russians, and the French acting together. And we just totally destroyed the Turkish fleet, which meant...
we didn't destroy the empire.
Possibly, mate, possibly. I mean, my deal would have been Britain should have occupied Constantinople, got rid of the Turks, but occupied Constantinople themselves. But Britain was never quite willing to do that. I think that would have been the real solution, to be honest.
It's a wonder we didn't just have, let's say we destroy the empire, but we have a Turkish nation set up. It would have domination over the Dardanelles just to close off the Russians. Like, such a Turkish government would be a complete puppet, but for the likes of the Balkan countries...
Well, they pretty much were a puppet, though, Mitch. That's the thing.
Not really. I mean,
up until Britain got involved with the nonsense and ententes with France and then Russia. And that, at that stage, that's when Turkey abandoned Britain, because all of a sudden we were supposedly allies with the Russians. So the Turks abandoned us and became German allies. But that was just stupid British foreign policy, basically.
I mean, let's face it, the only problem with smashing the Turkish Empire is we end up having to do the Balfour Declaration in World War One. That's the only problem we've got. But the Turkish Empire deserves to be smashed, though. When you look at what atrocities they did to the Bulgarians
and the Armenians,
Well, of course, internally, as Alice has pointed out, the Young Turks took over, and effectively, it was a Turkish nationalist movement. So if you were there was active persecution of Greeks, Arabs, people non-Turks within the empire. So in many ways, that was. I mean, you forget that there were some Turks in there that were happy the empire came to an end.
Yeah, I just think the solution really would have been that Britain should have just divided up the Turkish Empire, should have said, okay, we're going to take Constantinople in the same way that we took Cyprus in the 1870s. That would have solved all problems. Turkey would have been completely out of Europe, no Turkey in Europe at all, and they could have done what they liked in Anatolia, and I wouldn't really have cared, to be honest. But, I'm very realpolitik in most of this sort of stuff.
I mean, I would have created a Kurdistan sort of kingdom. I mean, I wouldn't have done it republics. I would have done like a Kurdistan kingdom or sultanate or whatever they wanted to form.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't have been against that, mate. I said, I was generally, I would have been in favor of Greek independence from Turkey for sure. And that's okay. But I think Britain's only real interest there was the Dardanelles, and Britain should have just taken over Constantinople and the Dardanelles, which we could have done. I mean, the Russians wouldn't have liked it much, but there wasn't much they could do about it, given the difference in naval forces. So, yeah, that's what I would have done.
I was going to say, I'm going to have to head off in a sec, but one thing I would say before we go, and that's just, I wanted to talk about the war in Ukraine. And The Economist, the BBC, other articles, even that History Channel, which went very pro-Ukraine, Kings and Generals, have all come out over the last few days, and they've actually started saying, actually, it looks like Putin's got this in the bag.
Of course, which he has, and has had right from the start.
And I mean, even king and generals have come out and said, Russia's made quite a few gains recently, and with the winter coming in, I think now that in Ukraine, there's, along with most of Europe, there's been a huge amount of snowfall, and they would have the steppe winter has come in, and
the Ukrainians are running out of men. Like, they're now recruiting everyone from 14 to 70 if they're male, and loads of chicks as well who are entirely useless for infantry combat. But
yeah, and of course this leads to the big question. I don't know if Mitch would know this, but will we see a Russian winter offensive, like a proper offensive?
I mean, I'm off that one source I follow, but Calibrated, which Duke will know.
Yeah, I know that Russians, dude. Yeah, he's quite a sensible American dude. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, the Russians have begun to advance in a lot of areas, not just Avdiivka, but also in other areas of the front. So, and in the case of Avdiivka, it's very well fortified. So the fact that the Ukrainians are buckling in that area kind of tells you how dominant the Russians are in terms of firepower and whatnot. For example, Marinka, which has been fought over since day one of the war, has just fallen this week. So,
yeah, no. To me, like, it's, as time has gone on, all that happens is it just becomes more and more obvious that Russia is going to win.
Do you want to hear the best bit, though, guys? I do follow. Like, I type in Ukraine war and I want to see what which people are saying, and of course you've got the Ukraine cheerleaders, on social media, and there was one conversation between them. I couldn't believe this. It was amazing, and they said, well, with the winter weather coming in, this should stop any Russian advance.
Yeah, like the Russians have never done an attack in winter ever.
Oh God!
not going back to like, not only the Napoleonic Wars, but back into the Swedish Wars. The Russians have never attacked in winter.
I mean, if you wanted to be going far back, I mean, you could look at the princes of Novgorod against the Teutonic Knights.
I mean, it's like the winter of 1941 to 42 saw a Russian winter offensive that took the Russians quite a long way from Moscow.
And of course, the most famous of all Russian offensives, the Stalingrad offensive, was a winter offensive.
I just couldn't believe that. I mean, there is some cope I've seen.
The Russians will never be able to work out what their weather is in the winter and do an offensive.
They haven't got the capabilities to fight a winter war.
They're stupid. They don't have warm clothes. It was the Russians who were freezing in 1941 in December after Barbarossa. It wasn't the Germans.
Iron Duke. The reason why the Russians set fire to Moscow during the Napoleonic Wars is because they were too stupid and they needed to warm themselves up. It was that peasant Slavic mentality.
Yeah. All those French troops who froze to death on the way home, they were well equipped. It wasn't the Russian Cossacks who used to go around them. No.
they wouldn't share the firewood.
These people are so dim, it's unbelievable.
Oh God.
Honestly. Oh God.
I do. What do you think when the Russians are up like to the gates of Kiev and the final result is imminent? What do you think their final? Do you think they're going to go like full downfall? Downfall mode.
If I had to guess, and it would be just a wild guess, I think Russia will take probably like an oblast plus where they are now, all of the Black Sea coast, and including Odessa. And I think if they get that, then I think the Russians will be relatively satisfied. And that will also satisfy the Russian public in terms of the losses that they've had, because Russia has had a lot of losses, even though that I'm quite sure they're less than half of Ukraine's. But yeah, Russia has had quite a lot of losses. And the thing is, for Putin to be secure in his position, he's got to at least get that, in my opinion.
I mean, one of the problems that I would say, and this is with both armies now, is that it has in somewhat gone down into trench warfare.
Which happens a lot, mate. Look at the Korean War. The last year of the Korean War, trench warfare.
And it happens. Personally, I think for the Russian, I think for any army, fast, quick, decisive, like blitzkrieg, like the German army in France, is like the better style of warfare.
But you can only do that, AI, if you have a decisive advantage over your enemy. You have to have a decisive advantage. It might be any combination of air power, communications, armored vehicles, tactics even, but it's a combination of those things. If you don't have that decisive advantage, and artillery, of course, and if you don't have that decisive advantage, I think you always end up in trench warfare. Like I said, the last 18 months of the Korean War was mostly trench warfare, because whilst the Americans and the Brits and the other allied nations had better technology, but only a bit, the Chinese had far more manpower, so it balanced it out, and you ended up in trench warfare. If you look at the Second World War, lots of the Eastern Front warfare was trench warfare, because the two sides couldn't bring sufficient advantages to their side in order to push it away from that. So, like from 1942 onwards, it became increasingly trench warfare. Even in Normandy in 1944, when the Brits and the Canadians and the Americans invaded France, for 3 months, it ended up being very largely trench warfare. And the thing that tipped it in the end was overwhelming Allied artillery, including naval artillery, and also air power. But it took a while, and British regiments in Normandy in 44 were losing more men proportionally than many British regiments lost in World War I, which is completely forgotten these days, of course. But that was the fact. I think what's happened these days is you're in a situation where anti-tank guided weapons, etc., are so strong that actually launching a big armored attack and breaking through is much more difficult than it was even in 1944. And in 1944, it was more difficult than people think it was.
Well, remember, we saw, I think we covered on this channel on your show, the Ukraine offensive in the east, and that basically what happened. They had a column of armored vehicles and tanks, and immediately they were, I mean, I think like literally within a couple of hours, it was just destroyed. It was just a wreckage in fields.
Yeah. And these were all the latest Western vehicles. There were German Leopard 2 tanks, there were American Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, etc. But the point is, and this I've said this before, but it's worth saying again, this Ukrainian counteroffensive, which went on far too long. I mean, every military dude knows it went on far too long, because it had failed 3 months before they stopped it. Obviously failed. It took far, far, far less territory than the notorious British offensive on the Somme in 1916, which is widely regarded as one of the greatest British disasters of World War One.
Yeah,
And the Ukrainian offensive made that British Somme offensive look pretty successful in terms of ground gained.
Well, yeah, and of course, I think someone in the chat just said about in the south, the Ukraine has done like small crossings in the south.
Yeah, they
the eastern part of
got
Dnieper.
6 guys one place, and 12 guys another place, and 18 guys another place. And I don't think the Russians give a shit because they can wipe them all out when they want to.
Well, yeah, because they haven't. They're basically on the sort of bank of a river, and that's about it.
They're going nowhere, mate. They're going nowhere. And what are the Ukrainians looking forward to? Well, they're getting some old F-16s, and they are quite old, with quite old radars and sensor systems. And when they get them, the Russians will probably destroy at least half of them on their airfields before they even take off.
And then that comes the other thing, because there have been
Ukraine's never going to win this war. It is impossible for Ukraine to win this war.
The reason why I wanted to raise this is that I'm now seeing just openly establishment people, establishment papers, establishment news outlets just openly saying pretty much Russia is winning, or Russia's about to win, or this can't continue. And I think number one, you're seeing more of this because they're going to. It's basically just going to normalize the public and saying, yeah, Russia's going to win. Russia, prepare for Russia to win. But also, I think it shows. I think there'll be one or two things that happen. And again, there's been other articles saying about how the Ukrainian army are completely, the morale was like, down, zero effectively. There has been a great internal cultural shift, which has where you've had more westernized liberal policies being pushed through. There have been effectively outlawing of Christianity, and I know there is one particular Tory boy, quote unquote Tory boy, he says he calls me out on this, but I'm sorry, but they've been shutting down Orthodox churches.
Yes, they have. They have. Russian Orthodox churches. Yep.
And he says, "Well, oh no, you got Ukrainian Orthodox churches. What are you talking about, AI? Well, what is a Ukrainian Orthodox church? What is it?"
Well, I think he's like a priest. A lot of them spend time in England, like getting educated how to how to preach the gospel by the CLV, if I remember correctly, or at least like priest inclined to global homo. Should we say?
Victor Kaleros in the chat is saying that not only have they been shutting down Russian Orthodox churches, they've also been shutting down pretty old Russian Orthodox monasteries as well. And
about Kiev,
he's correct about that too. Yeah,
I mean, some of these sites were literally the fact when we talk about Vladimir the Great. I mean, these were the sites where Christianity was first introduced into Russia in the Kievan Rus state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Catherine the Great moved loads of these people in there. I don't know if you've seen it, AI, but like I've seen interviews on Russian TV, which of course are banned in the West because we want everyone to speak. Ha ha ha. So these interviews on Russian TV are banned, but there are descendants of Greek people who were moved into that part of the world by Catherine the Great, who were liberated by the Russian soldiers, and were telling people how badly they were treated by the Ukrainians, and how it was only the Russians when they liberated them who were bringing them food and war and basically keeping them alive.
Yeah. I mean, I remember during the early starts of the war, you had, again, accounts, pro-Ukrainian accounts, and people on Western ship libs who were saying, oh, this Greek, it was in the, I can't remember which, was it Odessa?
Mariupol's where
Mariupol, yeah.
Mariupol, even.
Loads of Greeks around Mariupol.
Yeah, Mariupol. They were saying when the Russians were, they said that, these Greeks, they are a fifth column. They're a fifth column. You need to need to round them up. You need to again. They were very much viewed as from the outset as a as an enemy and
But
terminal enemy.
why? But why? Why would
Well,
the Ukrainians regard Greek settlers who arrived there 250 years earlier with the same religion as the fifth column, whereas the Russians, brought them supplies and actually saved these little old ladies and women and children from dying?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head about the same religion part, because what the Ukrainian leadership are either atheists or I mean, I don't even know what the sort of more Catholic Western Ukrainian types. I don't think even they're represented now. I mean, I just view the entire leadership as militant atheists, small hats pals at this point.
Yeah, the Western Ukrainians, as Victor Claros says, are not so orthodox, but the Eastern Ukrainians are orthodox and mostly pro-Russian, which is why Russia's making ground all the time.
I would say I do remember Mark Stein when he went to the Hungarian, sort of the Carpathian region of Ukraine, where they speak. They're more like they're Catholic, but they're more Hungarian orientated. And when he was there, because again, they're meant to be technically they're the more sort of pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian. But even then, when he was interviewing, they were like, "Well, we're Hungarian. This isn't really our war."
Yep.
And so that was quite interesting one. Like even there was like young men still about, and I was thinking to myself, surprised they aren't been like conscripted.
Yeah. You won't see many today though. When you rarely see a film of Ukrainian towns, there ain't many young men left, to be honest.
No.
But I mean, look, all of those areas are ethnically Russian, and the Russians should take them over. And as a Brit who lives in Australia, I don't care who runs Ukraine, quite frankly. It makes no strategic difference to Britain, but it does to Russia. And I don't care. I mean, the only thing I think is evil is all the men killed by people like Biden and Sunak and scumbag in Canada and scumbags in Australia who have said, "Oh no, you fight to the last Ukrainian." All those husbands and dads and sons and brothers who have been killed in the Ukrainian army, they're down to those scumbag leaders of supposedly us. When Russia was always going to win this war, there was no way Russia was not going to win this war, because Russia is a much bigger country with a much bigger population, a much bigger military, and a much bigger industrial base.
I mean, again, in this country, during the start of the conflict and all the pro-Ukrainian, I mean, some of the propaganda that was like supporting Ukraine was like, we're going to have like the internationalist brigade. A lot of it played on the left-wing socialist mythologizing around the Spanish Civil War, right?
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I remember that.
And you had a lot of people in, there was a couple from near where I lived which went over and joined and were killed immediately, and they had no military experience.
I remember them interviewing like every shitlib on YouTube, people like Lindy Page and all these shitlibs on YouTube interviewing former British soldiers who fought for Ukraine when they came back, and I just thought they were all scumbags. And I thought to myself, look, mate, if you wanted to fight for your people, really, where were you when South Africa was fighting?
Yeah,
because that's where Rhodesia and South Africa. That's where Brits should have gone and fought, not fucking Ukraine. I mean,
there was one.
Long time later, but you know what I mean.
I mean, I remember you had the famous Reddit battalion, as it was coined, that went over there.
And striked within like a week of assembling.
Because they were all using their phones, Mitch, so the Russians could work out exactly where they were.
I think it was some anon on 4chan actually found the location and then sent it to the Russian Ministry of Defense or whatever, the Russian military.
It wasn't that.
Wasn't it? That's what I heard. It was
if you keep modern mobile phones are a location device that, as a side product, sends telephone messages. Basically, it's a true story. Modern mobile phones are a tracking device that, as a side product, sends telephone messages. That's the truth. So if you keep using your mobile phone somewhere where the enemy can send a bomb or a missile at you, you're really just committing suicide because you're a moron. But those people were morons, so what a surprise.
But I mean, there was one of them that I guess survived and returned home, and basically said, we were taken to, like, in Lviv, like this. This is after the rocket attack on their barracks. He was taken with other recruits. They were then sent. They were given like basic military uniform, but they weren't given any boots. And then they were sent out marching. So told to march from Lviv to Kiev. So they were on foot, and they were given no weapons. And then the Ukrainian officer who was there basically told them if they try and run away, he'd shoot them.
The latest one I liked, as we get towards the end of this, dudes, because I'd like to wrap this up at 3 hours. Was the Ukrainian cheeky babe who was sent as a DR person, like a propaganda. What's the right word? She was a commissar, but she was a commissar. Very cute little Ukrainian girl. And this Ukrainian company was supposed to attack the Russians with no support. So they had no artillery support, no air support, no fuck all. And if they attacked the Russians, they were all going to get killed, basically, because that's what happens if you do that against a well-prepared, dug-in enemy like the Russians are. And so she kept saying, "Oh, no, you're all cowards. You're not men. You're all refuseniks," and all the rest of it. And eventually the company commander pulled his weapon up and shot her in the face about 3 times. And I thought she got entirely what she deserved. And I hope that happens to all the girls that do that, frankly.
Yeah, the thing is that actually happens a lot. Like when you look up Roman stories of Germanic tribes and Celts, the women are known to do that. They just egg on the men, and they'll kill any men that dare to, like, retreat from battle or whatever. So that's like, I'm not surprised Ukraine's going to do that. Start having the women bollock the men for ever daring to.
I just hope all the commanders do what that bloke does, brings his firearm up and kills the girl stone dead on the spot, because that's what she deserved.
That happened, I think, also in the French Revolution during the Austrian invasion, during just early start of the invasion, because you had women that would tag along with the armies or the militias and stuff.
Yeah, they were mostly prostitutes, mate, who did that.
Well, yeah, but same thing. It was similar instances happened in that regard. I was going to say what? Oh, yeah, Spanish Civil War. Again, you had women. You had like women fighters there, and you had like women battalions, and then the Moroccans.
But this woman wasn't a fireout. This woman was not a fireout. She was only there to shame the blokes into attacking and dying and getting maimed and then getting their dicks shot off or whatever it might have been. And this company commander, the officer in charge of the 100-odd guys in his company, just killed her. And that is the right way to deal with women who do that sort of thing. It is.
I mean, the thing there is, there have been occasions where you've seen like on the Ukrainian side where you've seen like soldiers shoot officers.
Well, she was supposedly an officer, but she was a chick officer, which doesn't really count in my opinion. But yeah, all right.
Yes.
Doesn't really count. Nathan C.J. Hood says, "Evening, fine fellows. Now, Nathan has just, I know, done either a stream or a video. So please go and check it out, guys, after this stream finishes. Because Nathan's a very good guy. But yeah, no, these chick officers who want to pretend officers, not really, of course, but who want to call you cowards and refuse nicks and, you want to attack. Yeah, shoot them. That's what I would say. Just kill them. It's what they deserve.
Yeah,
no sympathy for that woman whatsoever. No,
I just can't. I just can't take any of that seriously in any army.
Women officers even. I mean, like you might call a ma'am in peacetime, but in wartime, you're just going to tell her to fuck off, cunt. Basically, you really are. You're going to say fuck off, cunt. You're not going to take the slightest different notice of her because, apart from anything else, in a real war, she's going to be lying on the floor crying because that's what women do in the face of violence. And war is violence. It's extreme violence.
Could you imagine
this is why little cheeky babes doing training for the British Army, getting shouted at by a sergeant, go and have a go at the training sergeant, and they make a formal complaint about him, and the British Army turns around and says, "Oh no, our sergeants should not be allowed to shout at our little cheeky babes." Well, sorry, babes. Once you get into the front line, when you can get shot in the face, bayoneted in the gut, and then captured and raped, you're going to find the whole thing is slightly different to what you think it is.
I mean,
really,
I
you're
think
going to find it's different.
I am shocked that a lot of them who join the army, the reason why they join is that they want to do like humanitarian work. That's just mental.
Okay. Yeah.
I do wonder though, Andrew. Let's just say hypothetically, like I joined the military and I was asked to, or the army, and they asked me why you're joining, and I said, well, I want to kill people. I imagine that wouldn't be an acceptable response.
No. The acceptable response in my day was, and I was asked this question, I said, why are you joining? I said, because the Middlesex Regiment is now part of the Queen's Regiment, sir, and that's my family regiment. And the major is interviewing me with a big smile, wrote on his form, family connections, which of course was the way you wanted it to be back in the day, because that was the real reason I was joining. But humanitarian stuff, all right. When I did my first tour in Northern Ireland in Belfast, we had little bastards throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails as petrol bombs and what have you. But on the other hand, we'd sometimes be in a Protestant area and we'd give the kids sweets out of our ration packs. But the Protestants weren't trying to kill us, so humanitarian, if you like.
I mean that counts as humanitarian work.
I think. I'll be honest with you. We used to let the little nationalist stroke Catholic kids get away with huge amounts of bullshit and chucking shit at us before we do anything bad to them. And even when we did do something bad to them, it was milder than they deserved, which in my view was
I tell you what. Well, I mean, it's not like you were the Russians and you were dealing with like little Chechen kids, because I know what, in the early 90s. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know enough about that, mate, to be honest with you, but we didn't.
I would say
I'm not going to say that the whole British Army were good guys, because they were, but we didn't kill kids. We definitely did not kill children. Not if we could avoid it. Unlike the Provisional IRA, for example, who frequently did.
Oh, yeah, they're proper criminals.
They would kill kids without any second thought, whereas we would very much try not to. And all right, there might have been the odd British soldier who would try a bit less than I would, but generally speaking, you couldn't kill kids in the British Army. You weren't allowed to. You would have got in big, deep shit if you did. And we've tried not to. And not just because you would have got in shit for it, but because we were basically good guys. You know, so many of us had kids of our own. So, you know. But that's all I'd say about that.
I think definitely. I think the British Army in Northern Ireland were well better disciplined than, I guess you would say, compared to the American forces in Vietnam, for instance.
I don't know about that, mate. If we were, the difference would have been that we were all volunteers, and America had the draft back then. So they had a lot of. That's why I think they had a lot of reluctant soldiers. And you're always going to be better disciplined if you're volunteers than if you were made to go there. So, yeah, all right. Fair enough. But I wouldn't say that, you know, I wouldn't say your average American is less or more inclined to kill kids than the average Brit is. I think most of us don't want to do those sorts of things, to be honest. But obviously, if you have a conscript army, as the Americans did in Vietnam, you're going to end up with soldiers there who don't really want to be there. And those guys are going to be less well disciplined because they didn't volunteer to go there. They're there against their will. That's all I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, World War II and...
I'm probably going to shoot off in a minute.
Yeah. Same.
All right, guys. We're going to wrap this up in a bit because we've gone over 3 hours now. Anything you want to shill AI or final thoughts?
I want final thoughts. Only interesting thing to maybe develop, I would say people watch out this coming month is what happens in Ukraine. He talks about a lot about like the medieval figures and Napoleon, so that was quite good. Check out Nathan Hood, CJ Hood's channel and his latest stream.
Yep. 100%.
Next week or this coming week, I hope to continue my series of the mysterious death of the British Empire. With
cool. I shall look forward to that. That's a good stream. I've been watching that. I will definitely.
I was thwarted last the previous week because it was I invited him on and it was Thanksgiving and I totally forgot the Americans have Thanksgiving on a Thursday. So
yeah.
It should be good. We'll talk. This one will be about the American War of Independence, I should say the War of Independence and the consolidation, I believe, the British power in India. So
yeah, that'll be interesting, mate. I will definitely watch that. Do go and check out AI Shia Tori on YouTube. Very good channel.
I would also say that the book was written by Richard Hilton. What I say because I'll be reading it. It's not my views. It's Richard Hilton's views.
Yeah, they're pretty good. They're pretty good, though, mate. They're pretty good views.
Yeah. So if
I've read that book, they are pretty good views.
Yes, but I always say I always say on my channel that if any of you disagree, that remember it's not my words. This is what Richard Hilton's observing, and because he was quite a senior figure in the empire at that time, I think his analysis is probably quite spot on because he's not the only one. There are other figures in the British Empire who also noted similar trends.
Glub Pasha, etc. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, people like that, Glub. Yeah,
yep, 100%. Totally agree, mate. Mitch, anything as last thoughts or anything you'd like to plug?
I'll just plug my Twitter where, I'm going to do a lot more edgy stuff on my Twitter to try and get my name on that Antifa list next time.
Don't blame me, Mitch. Everyone who's worth anything should be on their Antifa list. because if you're not on a soy boy list, what are you doing, boys? Anyway, yeah, totally agree. Listen, guys, somehow this turned into a mostly historical stream, which I guess is okay. But we did talk about Ireland a bit. We did talk about Russia a bit. And Britain continues on its woeful way to total destruction under Rishi Sunak, sadly. Not that, and the thing that worries me is not that Rishi Sunak is leading us to destruction, because he is, but it's the fact that Keir Starmer will do exactly the same thing. So any British person just switching their vote from so-called Conservatives to so-called Labour, I'm not going to make the slightest change. You have to go for another party, boys, and it can't be the Lib Dems or the Greens.
Who among here is actually going to vote for Lib Lab Con? Really?
Yeah, you can't. You can't vote for Conservatives, Labour, Lib Labs. You know the people I'm talking about, and the Greens. You can't vote for any of those parties, boys. If you're British,
okay,
you've got to vote for any of the right wing, relatively right wing, right of centre populist parties, and it almost doesn't matter which, really, to be honest.
Well, I've been no doubt it's kind of like a broken record, but like, at this point, like anyone listening to this, we're not going to vote Lib Lab Cotton, so I think the message is kind of a bit redundant.
I really hope so.
If someone here votes Tory, despite listening to us, then that's someone's lost at this point.
Yeah, they would have to have a barely double-digit IQ, I would say. But yeah.
Well, it's not bad. It's just cognitive dissonance of a very schizo degree.
100%. All right, guys, I'm going to try and play us out with a tune. I don't know if it'll work, but we'll try.
Oh yeah, you forgot to check your entropy, didn't you?
I'll do that at the end of it, Mitch.
Okay.
I'm going to head off now.
I'll do that after
good
the
night.
tune. Go well, AI. Thank you for coming on. Let's see if this plays and if there's any sound. I will check it out, Alice, a little after this. Is this going to play on? Who knows? I certainly do. Bum, 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 bum. Damn, I can sometimes. 138. Bum, bum. Yeah, I don't think this is working. Oh, maybe it is. right. Okay, that was, of course, the excellent Patriotic Archives channel, and it was a couple of Scottish British Army military tunes, including the Black Bear, which is my favourite pipe tune, and the illustration was the 42nd Black Watch Highlanders storming the Egyptian entrenchment at Tel El Kebir in Egypt in 1882, when Britain did not fuck around with our enemies, unlike these days. So there we go. All right, guys, let me just check our entropy, because I'm told we may have an entropy check. Indeed, we have two entropy chats. Okay. EH for USD $5. The first radical left movement in Russia, People's Will, was very J influenced. They killed Alexander II in 1881, which is very early for anarchist killings worldwide. Well, I can't really argue with that one, EH, which I think is Alice Little. But yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. EH also sends us a second super chat via entropy for USD $3, saying left-wing anarchism was a major threat in the late 19th century through to the early 20th century. It was a cause of the first Red Scare in America and Hoover's response, as well as Sydney Street in the UK. And of course, we did speak about the siege of Sydney Street in the early 20th century, earlier on, very early in the stream, actually. So yeah, thank you very much for those, EH. I don't know if you've got anything to say to that, Mitch, in terms of the left-wing anarchism in the late 19th and early 20th century.
Yeah, I can't really think. Can't really think.
I'm just agreeing with her basically, because I think that's true. Alice Little, as I said, I think they're your super chats, and yeah, I'm not disagreeing with you on either of the things you say there. You know, totally correct, pretty much. So yeah, I think we've probably done our stream for today. It's a bit longer than last week's, actually. It's now 3 hours and 12 minutes. But yeah, go well, folks. Please don't let the bastards grind you down. We haven't lost yet. Although I don't think we've got long left to try and turn things around, but we'll see. And all of you should start supporting a thing called remigration. This should be a key term for the DR from now on. Anyway, have a good weekend and a good week, boys and ladies, and we'll see you next week. I'm pretty sure I said in this damn stream.